Okay, sure. So just calling to order the second meeting of WeChalk, Town Finance Community Housing Oversight Committee. So we're fortunate to have members of Needham Housing Authority to speak with us this evening. But before that, we have a few administrative items. And it's just great to see everybody here. And I'm wondering if we have any public comment. As we start, yeah, should come on up.
No podium?
Not in here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, my name's Ross Donald. I live at 25H Chambers Street, and I was born and raised in Needham. And I'd like to mention a guy named Wally Stone, who's a naturalist in Needham. He worked for the school systems around here and had a camp in New Hampshire called Camp Union. A lot of Needham people went up there, as well as people from the inner city. It was an interesting effort on his part. And at any rate, every once in a while, the counselors would get the idea that they could take over the ball field or the cabins or whatever. And every year, Uncle Wally had to remind the counselors that camp is for the camper. So I think the message I have to say, public housing is for the residents. No residents, no public housing. So at any rate, just wanted to mention that. I think one thing that's really needed is something like an information clearinghouse. People have mentioned this before. And it may be, I mean, that may be what's inspiring part of the effort to have a separate website for development or so forth. I don't think that's appropriate. I've been making requests for information that go unanswered. I'd like to see Bob Smart's zoning study. I'd like to see the arborist study for Linden Chambers, as well as the whole 300 pages that we've been hearing about of work product. And that could be placed in some sort of a central location, like an information clearinghouse or a design center. I've proposed that Linden Street Community Building be used for other things, you know, as well as mainly for residents, but also to have a place where we could have a community design center where we could bring this information together. Right now, a lot of the old drawings, if we can find them, the town has copies, but they're in barrels in the old DPW building. So these are resources, and I could go into that, but especially an information clearinghouse would be valuable now that we have other news outlets that are looking for stories, for content. When there was the 75th anniversary of Needham Housing Authority, wonderful thing held at the golf club. Everybody, covered that story. It would have been interesting, maybe a different story if they found that cost $5,700. They can't find any money for a lot of little things, but they can find $5,700 to have a party at the golf club. I'm not saying anything. It was a wonderful time. I was there. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ross, you may, Oversight, I'm sorry. I'm
Back and forth.
I'm just wondering if you made the request for clearinghouse. Much of that information is in the hands of the housing authority. Have you asked the housing authority for that information?
I'm asking for it in bits, and I've asked it in bulk, but sometimes it takes a week. And what happens is if there's a board packet for a committee, if it goes out and I get on the list somehow, I can get it. If it's 2 weeks late, somebody has to search for it. So it becomes just one more effort. So, and I know that there are people in town that, and you know their names, they're on Facebook and online, and they're really like information hounds. They will chase down things. And I think they're a valuable resource. We can help them with information, community engagement, whatever the slogans are going to be to do that. I think it'd be a great help.
Thank you, Ross.
Yeah.
Any other public comment? Do we see anybody online? Okay, great, thank you. So next on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting, November 6th, 2023. Any discussion?
Those are great.
Okay.
Make a motion approval.
Second.
All right, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. All right, so, next, we need to elect a chair and a vice chair of the committee.
I'd like to make a motion to elect our select board representative Kathy Dowd as our chair.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, I guess I am the chair. And for vice chair,
I'd like to nominate Peter Pingleton.
I second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, and Peter is the vice chair. Great. So last week, I think we had a Zoom call with Katie and Cecilia and Peter and with Joe Barnes, who is co-chair of the Community Preservation Committee, just to talk about the relative roles of TCHOC and the CPC. I think we can have sort of a fuller discussion on this maybe after the NHA makes their presentation, just because I don't want to hold you guys up. I think maybe you're trying to get to another meeting, but I would say that the headline from it was that they were very happy to get input from this committee. If there are due diligence questions that we come up with or anything else, you know, they seem very happy to work with us. And I don't know if Peter or Katie or Cecilia would add anything to that.
No, I did think that they expressed a willingness, or Joe Barnes did on behalf of the committee, expressed a willingness to work cooperatively. Was agreeable to sharing and were interested in sharing information like the answer to due diligence questions for us. But we were conscientious of the fact that we didn't want to go over and retread what paths that they had already dealt with. And they were amenable to having us, the consultant, speak to us at an appropriate time.
I think I just said, we asked explicitly about funds from the town that have already been appropriated to the housing authority. Would they appreciate this group doing the oversight of that? And he said, yes, definitely, but that's something they're not actively doing. So when we talk about next steps, I think that feels like a very clear part of the charge of this committee. And he was happy to have TCHOC do that.
So are we supposed to be submitting, once we read through their initial and information requests, so we to put together any other questions that we have? Is that the plan?
Well, why don't we discuss that at the end when we
Okay.
talk about next steps?
Sure enough.
But yeah, we can certainly do that. That's certainly it's certainly very welcome, but let's discuss it after the NHA gets to make their presentation. So I think we are ready for all of you to come on up. Looking
So,
forward to hearing what you have to tell us.
When I come sit up here next to Cecilia and Margaret and Matt, probably let's just do it in the order that we'll be presenting. So Dan is here, and Margaret is next. Matt is down there. Should we do introductions on your side as well as ours? I think that's what we're gonna start with. So you want to start on your side?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Avery, why don't you start?
Hi, Avery Newton. I'm here as a part of the Affordable Housing Trust.
Hi, I'm Denise Garlick, the state representative for Needham, Dover, and Medfield.
And I'm Kathy Dowd, a member of the select board.
I'm Peter Pingator, representative of CPC.
On inspector at large.
Yeah, I'm Richard Bone.
I'm David Davidson, Deputy Town Manager and Director of Finance with town.
Hi, Katie King, Deputy Town Manager. And Reg, do you want me to bring Cheryl over?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
We also have, we already have Teresa there. So good. Super. So I'm just going to be as brief as I can be. And the first slide, maybe. Next page. Yes, and so, one of the things we wanted to do is introduce the team that's been assembled here by the Needham Housing Authority. The leaders of the team are here in, the room with a couple of exceptions. People couldn't make it in person. And if you turn to the next page, just working, I'll work from, well, right to left. So we have Margaret Moran, that many of you've seen before now, leader of the Cambridge Housing Authority team. And I'm going to let each one of them introduce themselves and also their teams when we get to that part of the presentation. But just to put names to the faces, Matt Zajac, right here, who's standing in for our Natalie Johnson, who was our project manager that many of you have met already a few times, but had a baby a month or two ago and had a very happy situation, so on maternity leave. And so Margaret reached into her bench and plucked Matt out to cover the fort while she's away here. So, and then I have on my right, Dan Chin. Some of you have seen him before. He's the leader of the BH&A team and subcontractors that are working for us. On the screen, actually, if you could just come off the screen share for a second, is Teresa Santalucia waving at us here, second up from the right. And then we have Cheryl Gosman with us right there, Executive Director of the Needham Housing Authority, and myself, I'm Chair. Agenda. So we thought there would be 5 important topics to cover the first time here. One, a little bit of background and context for those people who don't know about the Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative, and I'll do that. Then we'll turn the presentation over to Dan, who is going to go through a high-level flyby of the schematic design stage that we just finished and some of the issues and some of the zoning that's involved, and speak to ways we're working with the planning board and the design process from this point forward. We have Margaret Moran, who's going to address building the capital stack. This is weighing in about a $83 million project after this, schematic design cost estimate updates, and where does that money come from and how do we do that? And everything associated with that. Teresa Santalucia is the newest member of our team. She's our special counsel for negotiating the developer partner agreement. She will introduce herself and her firm's expertise, Klein Hornig. I also realized that there was one person that's not here, which is Robert Smart or Bob Smart, that many of you may know from many interactions with the town over the last many decades. And he's been engaged as our local zoning counsel. Not doing anything here tonight, but next week he's going to be on the hot seat with the rest of us here. We'll get to that in a minute. And then finally, Matt Zajac, who will be covering just the roadmap ahead over the next 3 or 4 years. And I don't apologize, but we did tweak the presentation that we sent to Katie to distribute to add some line numbers, but also a Gantt chart at the end, which is much easier to digest than, especially on the screen, than just a list of milestones here. So we'll get a revised presentation out by email to everybody here. Okay, Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative, and first, Needham Housing Authority, I think needs no introduction around this table. Most everybody came to our 75th birthday party. We're one of the leading providers of social services in Needham for a very long time. We have 336 units of actual physical housing, another 123 Section 8 vouchers. And fun fact, we provide almost half of the actual physical affordable housing or usually affordable housing in Needham. The rest of it is, been produced through Chapter 40B, but a lot of it's market rate units that don't account for the SHI, but aren't really affordable here. Next slide, please. Basically, since the High Rock Homes project that some people in this room were very deeply part of 10 or 15 years ago, ever since we finished that, the board has been working with some setbacks on trying to get to the next thing. And we finally worked our way around to doing in 2019 a facilities master plan where it looked at all 336 of our units. We have 115 physical buildings on 43 acres of land. And it using a consulting firm called Abacus Architects, we basically figured out what we needed to do about all of that and faced up to the truth that many of these units are aging. Even our youngest units are quite old, 40 years old. And unless we did something, they would not be habitable in the next 40 years sometime, and we don't want to do that. And part of it, the recommendations that came out of that is what came to be known as the Preservation and Redevelopment Initiative, which is a 10-year plan, vision, probably more than 10 years. We're discovering as we get into it here, to actually redevelop all the old worn out units with new ones and add some more while we're at it. And also to preserve the younger units, which are 40 plus years old, but they are not tear downs. That's mostly the seabeds and folks developments here. And out of that process, the FMP process also came an RFP for development consultants that we put out. We got 3 great respondents, one of which was, to everybody's surprise, the Cambridge Housing Authority. And when we went through the whole Chapter 30B evaluation process, lo and behold, they were way out in front in terms of being the best choice for us. And that's been proven out now over the last 2.5 years that we've been working together. And working with them from 2021 to 23. And remember, we're starting in the middle of a pandemic here. So we put the RFP out when we thought the pandemic was over. Remember, President Biden announced that it was over, and then it came back in the summer, so in that little window, we got going here and haven't been back since. And we've identified 2 projects to go forward. One is the Linden Chambers redevelopment, and that's been on the town's radar screen for 2004, I think, housing and plan. And the other one is the redevelopment of seabeds in Cook, which is going to, through things that Margaret will explain to you, throws off subsidy that allows us to actually complete the financing for seabeds for Linden and Chambers there. Linden and Chambers, I think many people have had friends or relatives or something in Linden and Chambers, and it is really worn out at this point. It's on an 11-acre site, so but only half of it's really developable. The other half is wetlands and not accessible. It's provided particularly affordable housing for almost 60 years, and it's 152 units all together, very small studio apartments, no accessibility, etc. In fact, if you go to the next slide, 9, we've got a laundry list of ways that it just does not work at this point in the 21st century. And there's nothing that really can be salvaged about the structure that we've looked at, not only in 2019, but again by Dan's team to confirm that when they came on board. And that's why we're here tonight. The next page is just some pictures telling 1,000 words of the, problems. I love the one on the bottom left here, which, says they built the laundry rooms on the 2nd floor of a walk-up, for seniors, so, and it just doesn't work. And of course, if you're up there on the 2nd floor with the laundry, eventually you can't get up there and you have to be moved downstairs, causing just a lot of disruption and angst. Next page is 11, the goals that we established. These were refined over the years. The board was working on it and confirmed when we brought Margaret's team on board and then later Dan's team and so forth. And beyond preserving the units, a goal of adding new units. And we'll be looking at the plan now that Dan's team has developed to do that. Better quality of life, of course. Energy efficiency wasn't really something we were talking about 10 years ago when we were starting this process, but now we have the stretch opt-in specialized code, which, actually is a great thing for the economy, but has added cost to our project and made our heavy lift of funding even heavier here. Talk about that. And, of course, try to build something that's compatible with the neighborhood, meet our density goals, our, housing production goals, and, enhance common spaces for everybody that's living there. So major milestones were the hiring, after, again, the 30B procurement process of Dan's team, DHNA. He will introduce himself and what they've been doing, not only for us, but other parts of the town. We kicked off the actual design process in January 2023, so that's about 11 months ago. We completed the conceptual design in June and just finished the schematic design. The funding, and we'll get into more detail, but 50% of it came from the town of Needham and a CPA grant that was made. Thank you very much. And the other 50% came from a earmark that our representative arranged for us, and that pretty much covers what we need to spend. What have we done over the last 9 months to make sure we're on the right track? This is a sort of very brief laundry list of all the community engagement and listening sessions and presentations and so forth we've been doing. 4 with neighbors groups, and actually there are more informal meetings that have been done. 4 with our tenants, 4 with the planning board and staff, many more with the staff, 4 formal meetings with the planning board. 2 with the Conservation Commission, because we do have wetlands issues. 2 going on 3, if we get it scheduled a week or 2 with what is now known as the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Conditions. We're all practicing trying to say that. Does not roll off the tongue quite the way DHCD does, but so and that's just in the recent past. We, the board and staff have probably met with them 6 or 8 times over the last 6, 7, 8 years of just trying to get to the point of having this meeting tonight here. Coupled with the school board, select board, and board of health, we had a DRT meeting with all the town heads of the town departments in August, just to kind of confirm we're on the right track from that point of view, that sort of building commissioner point of view and fire department point of view, et cetera. And of course, there's been a fair amount of media coverage, which is great. Coming up is a big joint community engagement meeting. Has everybody gotten invitations here to that? Should have gone out to all boards, committees, and commission members, all town meeting members. We sent out nearly 700 physical mailers to neighbors in around the neighborhood and so forth. Of course, our tenants will know about it as well. And this is a plan that we put together with the planning board out of the 4th meeting that we had on the, November 7th. The idea is to get a head start on, what the sort of formal zoning process, and do that on an informal basis. In particular, try to have a good forum where everybody can kind of weigh in. The other important thing about that is the planning board decided at their meeting on the 7th to be the proponent of the zoning articles. So that helps, or, we'll obviously be in there pitching every step of the way. And then after the holiday break, there's the CPA funding request that we submitted. We'll talk about that a little bit more to the CPC. And of course, the process the planning board has to go through between now and end of March to tee up new zoning articles for inclusion on the warrant for May 2024 town meeting. So that's the table I've been trying to set. Let me turn it over to Dan. And how do we go about, how are your team going about signing for evening events, and who are your team? Who is the HMA?
Great, thank you. Good evening, members of the committee. My name is Dan Chen. I'm a principal with BH+A, Bartman, Henry, and Archetype. We are a 50-person firm architectural practice in the Seaport District. Our practice focuses on, four practices and, one of which is multiple family housing, in the affordable elderly development. So we have been working with Cambridge Housing Authority over the last decade. And so our studio focuses on both redevelopment as well as modernization, as in renovations. My team here you'll see was project managers, Brad, who organizes the daily routines, schedules. Nancy helps she's a project architect, helps with the interiors layout and some Wisconsin and drafting staff. We also have a historic practice, which part of it is that we've been working with Needham, which I'll touch on in the next slide. And so with our team here, it seemingly it's a large team, and it is typically in a redevelopment project of this complexity. And what has already been done in the context in the last 10 months is that we have completed a traffic study around the site in terms of, particularly because we're adjacent to High Rock Middle School, and that there are many of the sessions with the neighbors that traffic was a concern, particularly with construction traffic, what happens and so on. We've also, because our adjacency to wetland on the site, we have redefined the wetland demarcations of the site. We've met with the Wetland Conservation Commission here in Needham several times. We also have engaged an arborist, so our landscape architect, and essentially mark every tree on the site. And so in terms and what the impacts are from a construction perspective relative to the trees and the diameter and also the health of the trees. So and again, these are sort of standard procedures that we go through. A site survey has been procured for the entire site. The site is challenging in that it's not a small site. And so parts of the site has to be sort of not redefined, but to understand, particularly relative to the grading, to flooding in this area, which as you also see in our existing condition report, that the site is prone to flooding and has a high water. We've done it with our geotag. We have done borings of the site, so we know relatively where the groundwaters are below grade, what the soil conditions are. And this is sort of based on our concept design. And hazmat is because these buildings were completed in the 60s and 70s, the asbestos containing materials survey has been completed for all 23 buildings. So that 18 in the lindens and 5 in the chambers. And these are done such that either it's renovations or doing demolitions. These are captured costs that we have been put into our cost estimate in our report. And then the others are pretty sort of typical in terms of our mechanical engineer structures and so on. So that's why you see a lot of people on this team. But all of this is under our firm, my direction, and then so working to sort of put this project together. Next. DHA, we've done over 800 senior housing units in the last 8 years. And some of these projects that you see here are completed projects. One's in the middle is Cambridge Housing Authority, Daniel Burns. It's a modernization of 298 units of elderly housing, almost all singles are 1 bedrooms, and that has amenity spaces on the first floor. And as you may not know, elderly housing community component of a elderly housing development is particularly important. And that's why we pay a lot of attention to that. And so you see some of the community rooms. The ones on the left is the Situate Senior Center, which will also do a lot of the senior centers as part of our practice, recreation centers, senior centers. And if you go to the next slide, here in Needham, we completed Center of the Heights back in 2008, and then subsequently the Rosemary Pool, which is part of our recreation group, and the facility at Rosemary Pool. Currently, we're working on Emery Grover, turning that into from a historic structure that's listed on the National Historic Registry was our historic group, and that's turning that into, and the school administration is connected. And so with Linden Chambers, I think we're familiar with the entitlement process and zoning, given the complexity that's required for the Linden Chambers in terms of upcoming zoning warrant articles and the redevelopment opportunities. That's why we think that having Needham experience was sort of relevant here. Next, in terms of schematic design has been completed back in beginning of November, and at Linden Chambers, there are essentially two phases. There's phase 1A and 1B, and both of these phases, and you'll see in a little more clearly in the plan, we will have a total of 136 units, and these are all, majority of them are one bedrooms. There's 128 one bedrooms, and then there will be 8 2 bedrooms. The unit themselves are all one bedrooms, and one bedroom, majority are one bedrooms. There are 4 stories high. The total redevelopment of the site, including phase 2, is 247 units. Again, I'll touch on that in the site plan that follows. And the reason that we were sort of presenting these metrics is that the site, because of its neighborhood, because of the context, we wanted to, part of the concept study and subsequently schematic design is to understand what is reasonable in terms of the density. What is a possible density, for example, relative to the single families on Maple Street, relative to the residents on Linden Street. One thing that we do have here is that you do have a fairly large open field across the Linden Street. And so there may be opportunities here in terms of supporting the level of density that we're trying to propose here. In terms of the height, I think at 4 stories, we've done initially there were several different schemes options that we were studying, and we were looking at 3 stories, and it was a larger building footprint, was courtyards and what have you. But what it turned out was that a 4-story almost sheer core, as in, and again, you'll see that on the site plan and floor plans, is the most compact and efficient design, and therefore translates to the most economic design for these buildings. And so we had to sort of reorient our concept about phase 1A, 1B, and how to put these buildings together.
Dan, could I just ask a quick question here?
Yes.
I'm just to kind of set the stage, I've been a member of the finance committee for 10 years.
Yep.
On the CPC for 5, town meeting member for more than 20. So if I'm asking a question, you don't need to answer it today, but it's something that I think that the group ought to think about as they prepare to go before the select board, the finance committee, the CPC and others. And I will follow these up with written questions once we define how we want to ask these questions after you guys leave. But my first question was, in last year's presentation, you folks talked about 228 units, and it appears as if you've added 5 2-bedroom units to the plan. At some point, can you just explain why and the rationale for that? Not now, just kind of, if you wouldn't mind making note of that.
So, yeah.
All the questions at the end.
Yeah, I mean, just from a process standpoint, maybe we'll
Okay.
have questions if you want to write them, and we'll.
There is an answer.
No, I'm sure there is. I'm just trying to, anticipate questions you're gonna get as you're going along. So that's really why I'm asking.
Okay. And here on this one, I just want to start with quickly the current site plan. Rich talked about 152 units. This is the current Linden and Chamber site. What you see in orange are the 18 Linden buildings. These are single story. You saw the image earlier in the existing conditions. There are 4 units in each of these orange boxes, if you will. So a total of 72 units in the Linden site. There's a total of 80 units in the yellow box that you see. Each of those are 2 stories. And so it was 16 units in each building. And so the reason the number 72 is important is that in our phase 1A and 1B, and I'll touch on that when we see the site plan, is that that helps us in terms of phasing. And as you know, we can't complete this entire project in one go. Therefore, how do you minimize the impact to the residents here in terms of relocation? And also, what is the most efficient or the most logical way of building the first phase of the building, relocate everyone into that first phase of the building, build a second phase, and so on. So there's a lot of thought given to how the phasing, how does it work, where's phase 1A, 1B, and where it's located on the site plan. All of this has been worked into in the concept design. It's been refined in the schematic design. Next. So in this design currently proposed, we have 130 on-surface parking spaces. The building that you see in orange on the right is phase 1A. There's 76 units in that building. That's 72 one-bedroom units and 4 two-bedroom units. And the point here, and phase 1B is the one in grade 60 units. Point here is that yellow box that you see in the middle, that is the shared core. And so when we did the concept design report, we had 2 buildings, essentially 2 standalone buildings, phase 1A and 1B. And each has its own elevator, each has its own fire stairs, which require 2 stairs and so on. And so by combining them into a shared core into phase 1A and 1B, that we were able to reduce 2 elevators, we're able to reduce a set of egress stairs, and these are not insignificant costs. And that's why phase 1A building, which we needed to build these core elements first. And so that phase 1B is effectively a plug-in, if you will, that essentially takes that phase 1A infrastructure can serve. And here you have a drop off from the outside. We have some green space in front. And then also you see these sort of fire lanes around. And so we met with the Needham Fire Department. And so we sort of talk to them about what they need in terms of firefighting, fire protection. The building will be fully sprinklered, 4-story. It is a wood frame construction, and fully sprinklered building was the latest fire alarm annunciations and so on. So life safety is fully sort of flushed out, and we've done many of these type of buildings, both in private and public sector. So it's a pretty standard formula, if you will. In terms of the site plan design, what you see in these both black lines are the separation of the site in terms of phase 1A on the right of the black line that you see in the middle, phase 1B in between these 2 black lines, and then phase 2 to the south of the black line. And again, the reason why these lines are done this way is such that what you can almost see faintly is the footprint of the existing Linden building. And so by doing this, we were able to preserve a majority of the Linden buildings and relocating 24 units in first phase, which is 6 buildings of the single-story Linden building and building phase 1A. And then subsequently, because of 76 units, you're able to relocate entire of the 72 units of the Linden residents into phase 1A, and therefore allowing you then to complete phase 1B, which subsequently will be able to help with chamber development if there's as we move into phase 2. And I just also want to quickly touch on the reason why the parkings are laid out the way it is that they provide a buffer. And again, these are some of the results of meeting with the neighbors and the community abutters, particularly the abutters on Maple Street and also on Linden Street. So the buildings were pulled back as far back from the Linden Street as we can in terms of providing that buffer. And there is a fairly significant buffer in terms both of the wetland and also a tree foliage between Maple Street and the development. And so we've met with the Maple Street abutters as well. And so there are concerns that we're working through, but the design is not put into the site plan and vacuum, has been sort of and worked with the abutters, and we're not there. So but it's where we are currently. Next is a floor plan where we have a total of 35 units on each floor. Phase 1B has 20 units per floor, or sorry, 15 units per floor. Phase 1A has 20 units per typical floor. On the ground floor, we have a large community room, we have entry, and then all the infrastructures, mechanical, electricals, and so on. So, and also a common share facility, laundries, and are all on the first floor.
Yeah, what's the square footage? I can't read that on my copy.
The square footage is 575 square feet.
Okay.
That is each one bedroom apartment. DHCD or ELOC standard for one bedroom is guidelines is 600 square feet. So we're right in that range. And just to remind the committee, the current studios apartments ranges from 405 to 425. So they're severely sort of small and also lacking storage. We didn't bring it today, but we already have unit developments, particularly to these one bedrooms. So in terms of the storage, in terms of the kitchen, bathroom, bedroom layouts are done next. These are some preliminary renderings, and obviously they look finished because, you know, we have a great team at renderings and so on, but these really are sort of that's where we are looking at the massing and trying to understand how this 4-story building fit into this neighborhood in terms of the surrounding buildings, in terms of the context of the High Rock Middle School, the open fields, and so on. So so we took some key perspectives from one side of Linden Street, looking at the entry from the entry point from the High Rock Middle School, and also these aerial views, both looking from Maple Street and also looking from Linden Street. So that sort of gives you a sense. There are several other renderings that sort of help us to look at both in terms of the necessary screening, if you will, of these parkings from Linden Street with landscape, working with our landscape and civil engineers. And so these really are diagrams that help us as we move this project forward. The key process that we currently are looking at is immediately December 6th, there's a joint session with the planning board for a public meeting. And then subsequently, then in next year, our effort will be helping and support for getting the zoning warrant through the town boards in May of 2024. And then subsequent to after that is looking at the site plan review process. The major projects obviously need and was a site plan review, which in this case is particularly utilities, civil, landscape, and then the construction of the first phase 1A building is looking at Q2 of 2025. And this is, and as Margaret always said, we talk about sort of funding requirements, and so on. That's why these are out to the quarter of 2025. So essentially the entire year of 2024 will be used for part of that is for the zoning warrant articles. The other part is for bringing the building into construction documents and site plan review. And lastly, this I believe my last slide. We've had an estimate of $80 million or $79 million for concept report, and then and today for the schematic design we had an $83 million report. These are, I believe, total construction, not total construction. This is total project development costs. Construction costs is less than that in our current schematic design. I think we're looking at around for phase 1A and 1B is $58 million. And the major driver cost increase between June and November of this year is that there is a premium in terms of the energy code upgrades that has recently passed. And so with the specialized opt-in code, you are required to meet. There are several paths to meeting that requirement, one of which is a passive house path. And so what does that mean, passive house? Even before the opt-in code, this building will be all electrification. So we are anticipating all electrified air source heat pumps for this project. We are also looking at we're also looking at no fossil fuel, so there's no gas to this building. And the insulation of the buildings, the glazing, triple glazing, the roof insulations, the foundation insulations, the energy recovery units, the makeup air systems and so on, all of these are at a fairly sophisticated energy level. However, with an opt-in code, that level gets pushed up to another level. And one example I'll give is for example, a windows will, in order to get to passive house, most likely will have to have triple glazing instead of a double glazing window, which you typically see. In terms of the air exchange rates, air exchange rate for a passive house has to be fairly much more stringent than a typical stretch code and energy code, even with the updated 2021 IBC code that you have today. So there are real sort of costs to this. We are providing the building will be PV ready, not solar installed as part of the third party conversation. That's something that we will be sort of working on along with Needham Housing Authority. And then in the very beginning, we looked at geothermal generation in terms of energy, and that is significantly higher. And also, even with the utility rebates that you can explore from Eversource, and also the incentives. So at this point, that is still too expensive, I think, for this project. And in terms of the other sort of cost increases, inflation cost, because the construction of this building is not going to start until Q2 of 2025. We're looking at 6 to 8% of construction inflation, and that has been included in our construction cost estimates as well. So the current building phasing is that 2025 to 2027, these phase 1A will take around approximately 16 months to complete. And then immediately after that, phase 1B start construction, which takes around 12 months. And so you're looking at a phase 1B construction starting in 2027. That's 2 years escalation that's added onto that construction cost. So these are sort of real money that is being added into the construction. The others are interest rate insurance and so on. So I think that's my part in this.
So over to you, Margaret. Margaret.
Sure. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. Again, Margaret Dolly Moran. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for the Cambridge Housing Authority in the area of development. I've been with the Cambridge Housing Authority in some capacity for over 30 years, really in charge of their modernization, redevelopment, capital planning process over the last 25 years, and then the head of the department since early 2016. So well seasoned, whole career in public housing. So very passionate about public housing and deeply affordable housing. Was very fortunate to land at the Cambridge Housing Authority. It is has been my entire time there. A really innovative, creative agency that's really stands out nationally with much bigger shoes than our size. Some of the earlier executive directors were key in lobbying HUD back in the 1990s when insurance went crazy at that point in time. And actually they created their own captive insurance company to kind of solve that problem. But we've always been an agency that's been at the forefront of housing issues, able to be managed professionally with really quality staff, with a very stable board of commissioners. We actually have someone on our board who's been there since mid-1970s. And then really quality executive directors who've been in place. All the years I've been in Cambridge, I've worked with 3 executive directors. So that level of stability really accounts for our ability to achieve at such a high level. We're one of the original participants of the HUD's Moving to Work program, which is a deregulation program that allows the Housing Authority to combine the different funding it gets from the federal government and redeploy it in a way that allows us to be more nimble and responsive to local needs. So we've created some innovative programs to kind of reach at some of the folks that were in dire need of support that don't typically get reached. And we've been in that program since 1999, so over 20 years in that program. We have over 3,000 units of housing, including about 2,600 of former public housing. And so passionate as I've been about public housing, I never thought I would be the one who would actually move the Cambridge Housing Authority's portfolio from public housing to the project-based voucher program. But what we had realized in Cambridge, that if we didn't make that change, we were going to actually start losing housing and losing our ability to serve our residents. And so we started a process really 15 years ago, and that's where I've been the architect of kind of crafting a plan to try to put the housing authority's properties on a more solid footing, and that's meant transferring the properties from the public housing program to the federal public housing, federal Section 8 or project-based voucher program. In doing that, we've been able to increase the housing authority's revenue and resources, and be able to make substantial reinvestments in our property and really improve the quality of the housing authority's units in a very measurable way. The kinds of things that are being proposed at Linden Street are things that we've achieved in Cambridge through the last 15 years. We have a staff of about 240 employees, a budget of about 200 million. So since 2010, just to give you a sense of the work that we've done, we've leveraged or raised over $1 billion to reinvest in our units. So as we've moved the property from federal public housing, we've been doing anywhere between $250,000 to $500,000 of upgrades per unit, upgrades in every development. And so the units are very different today than they were 15 years ago. We are accredited. I think we were the 7th housing authority nationally to be accredited by the Affordable Housing Accreditation Board. We've been a leader in trying to set an accreditation program in place to allow housing authorities to really demonstrate their capability to be well managed and deeply engaged in the affordable housing field. And in Cambridge, we house and serve about 12% of the city's population. So we're, have a big footprint within the city of Cambridge as well. So I've got an incredible team at the Housing Authority. Reg introduced Matt, who is a newcomer, I have to say, but a really valuable addition to our team. He joined us about a year ago. Natalie Jansen, again, is on family leave. And then Chris Moyer, hi Chris, is actually, I get to give him credit because he put this PowerPoint together and did an incredible job, but he's our project manager. And then we have a bench behind me of an incredible talented team of planners and construction folks, so that we do all of our work in-house, all of our development work in-house, which is really unique for housing authorities. Just a handful of housing authorities in Massachusetts do anything similar, and none really at the level that we've been able to do. We have staff who put together all of the financial pro formas, negotiate with the banks and lenders the deal terms. We supervise our architectural and engineering teams, and then we oversee the actual construction. So we're a soup to nuts developer. And we did that because we felt we could provide the best service to our residents, and it was also a way for us to use some of the income that we get from serving as a developer to do better quality and more durable finishes in our housing, so that we get to reinvest some of what other developers use as a profit back into the properties, which I think has been really novel. And again, it's been something that our board started to develop over 20 years ago, and has really, I think, seen the success of it. So we have an extensive consulting and development experience. So for many years, our phone would ring and we would be asked, "What are you doing in Cambridge? Can we come and visit?" And said, "Sure, come and visit." And people would come and they say, "Well, how do we do it in our community?" And so we did a lot of we shared our documents, whatever we were doing, we were shared, but they're like, well, no, we need you. We need your team. We need you to come and help us do the same thing. And so our board asked us to start to develop a consulting practice. And to do that, we really expanded our our team, I think, we've grown by about 8 people to support our development activity, but it's a very multi-disciplined team from, project managers, architects, urban planners, construction, managers. We have actually, the former commissioner from the city of Somerville oversees our construction, division, energy specialists. So we really have kind of all the component pieces to, really oversee, the projects. And then we have partners like the H+A, and we've even worked with advocates on projects in Cambridge as well that, really help us achieve our mission. So again, we've been supporting other housing authorities in a role of a development consultant or a developer since 2019. I have a little list of who we've been working with. Tremendous experience in terms of using the tools that HUD has provided housing authorities to reposition their portfolios, and in doing so, we hope generate and actually do generate additional income for the housing authorities to then be able to reposition or reuse those funds into each housing authority's portfolio, as we've done in Cambridge. And then, we've got experience closing, and handling all the aspects of the finance with low income housing tax credits, historic tax credits, all kinds of debt products that we've used. And again, as I mentioned, since 2010, we've secured over $1 billion of financing. And we have a tremendous track record with our partners. I think if you were to go around and ask the equity investors and lenders who we've worked with, how they've liked working with us, they'll say that we're very thorough and very detail oriented, and very strong in our approach to putting the transaction together. I think we were one of the first developers to really think about not only what a deal looks like at a beginning, at day one, but also, with the low income housing tax credit program at year 15, the properties should come back to the sponsor, and you want to make sure that you structure your transaction so that it comes back to the housing authority or a housing authority affiliate at no cost or a nominal cost. But you've got to be thinking about that now, not year 13. And so we started asking those questions in some of our very first transactions, and the lawyers we were working with, why are you worried about that? Well, we were worried about it because we're public stewards of a very valuable public asset, which are homes to residents. And we never forget that what we do are actually impactful in so many different ways to the residents that we serve. So, that's really the mission, and always at the forefront of the decisions that Cambridge makes, and certainly what we bring forward when we do our consulting engagements. So on the next slide, we show we're everywhere. It's not quite, but we've been really, our first client actually was the Lewiston Housing Authority in Maine, and that just was, he knew somebody who called, and they had some work, and so that we're still working with them. But very shortly thereafter, we started working with the Medford Housing Authority. And part of their need was repositioning 144 unit state public housing property that they own, their last one. And they just were at wit's end, very similar in some ways to Linden. And so we did kind of the same concept, plan for their development, and came up with a really viable redevelopment plan. They didn't realize what resources they had available within their own world, that we said, hey, you got this, you got this, you got this, put them all together, you could do that. And we actually helped them secure a $15 million public housing innovation grant 2 summers ago. And so they're actually due to close this spring on a new construction of a new building that will replace, again, housing very similar to London Street. And they're basically taking that 144 unit site and turning it into 238 units, a combination of elderly housing, but then also family units, which will be the first new family units in Medford, I think, in 40 years. So, and a very transformative work. And we've been really happy to work with all of our partner agencies and really helping them kind of move through their goals and objectives in terms of trying to reposition their housing authority. I'll just say, when Needham put the RFP on the street, we hadn't really ever responded to an RFP because we would just respond to phone calls. And I went to my boss and I said, I kind of would really be interested in responding to this RFP. And part of that was because I was on the High Rock Homeless team back 15 years ago. And I remember leaving that project when it was done with about $600,000 or $700,000 in developer fee, with the hope that that money would be used to help the housing authority achieve the next goals. And sure enough, to Reggie's credit and to the housing authority's credit, they never spent that money until now. And that's been the tool of getting us started. But, I felt like I had personally had some work that was left undone here. And it was an opportunity for me to come back really much stronger with the CHA team, supporting, our work and bringing the incredible resources that we have as an agency to Needham. So the next page just lists out the work that we've done in Cambridge, and you'll see we're starting now to add our partner agency. So we actually have been working on 2 Medford projects. So we closed on our first Medford project that is in construction earlier this year in May of 2023, and we'll have our second project under construction in Medford in 2024. But again, we're working with projects in Cambridge and with a number of housing authorities moving forward. But you can see that we've been able to make quite a dent in terms of really improving the housing, and a couple of images from the housing authority, Cambridge Housing Authority's portfolio. The next number of slides really take you through kind of the numbers story, or as Reg likes to say, we're building a cake, or the layers of funding that really you have to put together to actually get affordable housing out of the off the ground and into the ground and into existence. And it's gotten even worse over the last couple of years as interest rates have gone up, and construction costs have escalated. I think all of the developers are seeing the list of programs that they need to lean into to get funding to make the numbers work out are just growing incrementally. So what you used to be able to do maybe with 6 or 7 sources, and now taking 8, 9, and 10 sources, and each one of them come with their own conditions and requirements and effort to actually secure. So it's really made it much more difficult. But this first slide just talks a little bit about the pre-development sources that we've used or had available for Linden and Chambers, and the 2 main sources have been the CPA previous award funds that the town has provided the project. And I can't tell you how difficult it is to get pre-development funding. So the fact that you actually provided that funding and then your representative was so good and successful in getting an earmark, I think are really reasons why we even are here today. I mean, absent both of those sources, we would not be in a position or have made the progress that we've made to date. So that's really a reflection to the commitment that the town is making to the housing authority and to that resource. And then the right side of the table just lists out all of the various expenses that we're incurring, and the biggest expenses are the first 3 lines, which is the architectural and engineering services that we're paying BH plus A. But we're also incurring legal services for zoning and partnership negotiations, and then there's incremental services for title report, site environmental traffic studies that we've referenced. Obviously, development consulting fees are there as well, and then we still have a contingency. But that's kind of the accounting of the funds. Very typical, quite honestly, for what I see for a project. And what this does is get the project ready to be bid. So we've got a concept plan for both Linden and Chambers, but we've got construction drawings that are biddable, that we could get pricing on, and that's kind of the place that we've stopped. And that's typically where I stop a project at a pre-development, and hopefully not for very long, and we just march it right over to bidding and construction. The next page just goes through the pro forma sources and uses, and you can see how many we have: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 sources of funding for the project. The biggest one is the low-income housing tax credit equity at $28.6 million. But we are also leaning in very, very hard to EOHLC, the former DHCD, for some funding that they've been providing housing authorities, particularly housing authorities who are moving their state public housing program to federal public housing, which is what is occurring at Linden. It's valuable to the town, or excuse me, to the state to actually contribute capital money and make that move, because the federal program provides more resources to a housing authority than what the state does, and then it alleviates the state from having to continue to contribute to the public housing. And the state public housing, all public housing has been underfunded, none worse than the state, where I think, you know, we've been under 70 cents to the dollar in the length of deferral that of work that needs to happen at every housing authority across the state is pretty well documented as well. And the federal program, while far from being perfect, is closer to 93 to 95 cents on the dollar. So you are improving your situation, and then if you do, which is part of the transition here, the conversion all the way over to the project-based vouchers, you're actually seeing, you know, a much more stable funding source than federal public housing. Then, and so you got the permanent sources on the left, and then the uses, with construction being the highest at 59.8. And as Dan mentioned, that number is inclusive of the escalation that we think will incur between now and when we are in construction for the first phase in 2025, but then also picking up that added escalation for the second phase being out there as well. Financing fees are a big part of a tax credit property. Pro forma, part of it is because the way you get the tax credit is you have to use tax exempt bond financing. And in doing so, you're partnering with the bank, who then you have to pay construction financing fees and interest payments. And the only way you get the credits is if you use bonds to cover at least 50% of your costs. So the financing fee line item is always a number that stands out, but absent that, you wouldn't qualify for the $28 million of low-income housing tax credits. And then any design fees, soft cost contingencies, reserves, and then the developer fee round out the balance of it. And then if we go to the next slide, we talk a little bit more about the different sources. As I mentioned, the biggest source is the low-income housing tax credit. And then we also, the Massachusetts has created their own state tax credit. So for this project, we're looking for tax credits from both the federal government and the state government. Typically, the buyer of those tax credit is a for-profit entity. You know, you have to, that you're getting a tax credit, so you have to have a tax liability to benefit from it. They're usually a bank or a syndicator. A syndicator will work with banks. They also sometimes work with insurance companies, but banks have been typically the biggest buyers of low-income housing tax credits or state tax credits. What's nice about them is that you don't have to repay them. They're getting repaid through the tax credit. So after you've met your obligation, which is to provide affordable housing, which, hey, that's what we do, those funds, you know, they've gotten their economic benefit through the tax credit. So those aren't funds that need to be repaid. But they do require that the equity investor be part of the ownership entity for the period of time that they're getting the tax credit. So I don't know if we've shown our structure before. I think we may have, but the tax credit investor comes into a limited liability corporation that the investor member is the big owner, 99.99%, but the managing member is usually an affiliate of the housing authority. And that affiliate is, even though it doesn't have much in the way of ownership, only 0.01%, is in charge of the day-to-day decision making that the property gets made, provided that, you know, continues to be operated as affordable housing. And, you know, there are some reporting requirements. You can't spend something that you haven't budgeted for unless you get the investor's approval and things for that, things like that. But really, the investor is there to reap the economic benefit of the low-income housing tax credit, not the economic benefit of the income that's generated from the operations of the property as affordable housing. And we could probably spend 2 nights on that, so I'm happy to come back.
That was the best rudimentary explanation I've ever heard.
We have a whole training on it that, we've done with our Cambridge residents, because they, always, want the details and all of that, but the next, important source of income for the, development sources is the mortgage, which is based off of the income that the property would receive through the, project-based vouchers that would be attached to the unit. So there we're forecasting, $15.5 million. And then, we've labeled the C category as soft funding, and these are funding sources that come from, generally the local, state, and sometimes federal government. Some of the energy money that would be coming from the federal government would qualify in this soft funding category. But again, we're looking to the state to provide significant funding to reflect the fact that the units would be moving from the state program to the federal program. And so we actually have that application in for $10.8 million, within, actually was submitted on Friday. And then, just on the bottom of the page, we just kind of reference where the vouchers are coming from. Needham Housing Authority has 12 vouchers that can offer to the project. Where you're gonna have 100 RAD vouchers, which reference to has some connection to the seabeds and Captain Robert Cook effort, and we can talk a little bit more from that. And then we did ask, as part of our public housing innovation funding application, for 24 vouchers from DHCD, and that would allow for all 136 units to be deeply affordable, which would be, clearly our goal. And then the soft funding, as we mentioned, we've got the public housing innovation funds. So that application went in on Friday. Thank you to Matt and Chris in particular for all his work on that. The funding for the housing production side of EOHLC, that one will be submitted in the fall of 2024. They really don't like to see, will not accept applications from projects that haven't really concluded their zoning, or at least have a clear path to zoning. So the fact that we have to go to town meeting is the reason why we weren't able to apply for funding this year. As we mentioned, Representative Gerlich was able to secure not one earmark, but 2 earmarks. The first one was to ARPA Chapter 102, which was 1.25, but there's also 1.5 million in the Partnership for Growth Act that passed, I think, almost 2 years ago now. And so the one resource we're already using for pre-development. The second resource is there for us to activate as the project moves forward. Inflation Act energy loan. So I think we all may recall President Biden's efforts around inflation and green energy. And so there are some resources that we'll be tapping in there. The local home program, Needham is part of the local consortium, so we'll be applying for funds there. I think the funding application is due in February. And then you can see the substantial contributions being sought for from Needham CPA, as well as loan from the Needham Housing Authority. And then the other sources are just a combination of cash flow from the property that will happen during construction, mostly after phase 1A is completed, a deferral of a portion of the developer fee, and then a conversation yet to be had with the town of Needham about potentially waiving the building permit fee to kind of help us tie out the sources. And then the next page really kind of gives the detail that I talked through already about what's been secured, what is been applied for, and kind of the timing for the balance of the items that we need for funding for the project. And then my last slide just kind of gave you was meant to kind of show how we're able to support the permanent loan, both in terms of the kind of rent levels that we're expecting to come in, and really then the evidence that we're not going to be inadequately funding the operations of the property and kind of driving it back into the ground, which is what we're trying to avoid from happening. And then how it all translates into a loan. So just you're seeing rents in the $2,600 range for some of the Section 8 vouchers. That's not what the resident experiences, that's what the housing authority gets paid. The resident's portion is 30% of their income for rent, so they're deeply affordable, so they would come in like they do now and have their income certified, and if they are have very low income, then their rents would be 30% of a very low income. If they have slightly higher income, then it would be 30% of that. I think on average, the residents at Linden pay about $350 per unit per month on an average rent. And so the deal for the residents doesn't change. And then that's the MTW housing choice voucher from EOHLC and from Needham Housing Authority. And then the third voucher is one that's called Faircloth to RAD. It's not as robust as a funding source for housing authorities, because the way HUD set up the RAD program is that you can use the money that you would get as federal public housing and get your capital fund on top of that, but you're not going to get much in the way of new funding. And so, that's the average rent we project for that. And so we've sized, again, the loan and the operating cost based on the fact that those 100 units will be at a lower rent than what you would get for the voucher program. But what I've been doing this for a long time, is kind of combining, from the resident standpoint, they're not going to be able to really tell what type of voucher they have. All they're going to know is that they're paying 30% of their income from rent for their portion of the rent. On the housing authority side, they're just going to get the income based off of these level of rents, and it's going to result in an annual income that will be much higher than what they've been experiencing as state public housing, and then high enough to support some debt on the property, but much more modest. When I do a project that has 100% of the higher rents, the project-based voucher rents, I can sometimes support anywhere between $200,000 to $250,000 per unit on debt. We're well below that here, and that's just a function of those Faircloth to RAD. But those Faircloth to RAD are really invaluable in terms of helping the housing authority make sure the units are deeply affordable to the residents, because the deal's the same, that 30% of income for rent. And it gives the housing authority enough to then operate the property successfully and to the degree that it hasn't been able to do in the past.
Margaret, do you have some type of glossary with respect to the acronyms here?
That's a great question.
Thousands of them here, and I'm
yeah.
sure that.
You know what, we're gonna go through the PowerPoint and give you a glossary for everyone. That's a great point.
Send the tweaked version, we'll attach the glossary.
That'd be great.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because it's beyond inside baseball at
This
this
isn't the
point.
cake, this is the alphabet soup.
And I do with the DHCD soft loans or the EOHL soft loans, I always call them an alphabet soup, because they always have a number of things. So we did put our risks, our caveats, risks, and disclaimers, because we're projecting out in an ideal situation that we get everything ready to go when we'd be in construction in that second quarter of 2025. But the reality is that everybody's fighting for federal, for resources for affordable housing. It's been a great time because affordable housing is getting kind of the focus that it hasn't, it's needed for a long time, and it's getting resources that it needs for a long time. But some of the resources are really constrained, and in particular, the resources for the federal low-income housing tax credits are very constrained. We've had a project in Cambridge now that's been delayed 2 solid years, ready to go, but there haven't been a sufficient amount of private activity bonds for those projects to go forward. We have projects right now that are a little bit further along than Linden and Chambers that we're being told 2026. And so, it's very limited, very competitive. Now things could change. We could we have to use the R word, a recession, and the rest of the construction market will dry up as a public entity, we'll still be ready to go. We'll benefit from that. There is a number of legislative actions that could also allow for kind of a doubling of resources. And if you're ready, you can go, kind of thing. So there are a lot of things that folks are doing to try to change the kind of logjam, I'll call it right now, particularly on the federal low-income housing tax credit side to solve that. Competition for other state affordable housing funding is also very competitive. I mean, the governor's bill, fingers crossed it passes sooner than later, will still be subject to the state annual bonding cap. And so, our hope is that, the state will again swing the numbers more favorably to housing type programs, but we also know it's really challenging with the MBTA and with road work and all other kinds of things. So we're kind of bound there. Redevelopment of state public housing is very difficult to do because you do have to keep the deep affordability, which, is a challenge to do, but an absolute obligation to be done. But it does make math a little difficult. And then for a housing authority that's small and that has limited resources, like the Needham Housing Authority, Cambridge has a very vast federal public housing portfolio, and the federal program has many more tools available. And we're leaning into some of the federal tools that are available because Needham does have some federal public housing, but it's still, a modest amount. And you have a modest number of your own Section 8 vouchers that then, really cap what Needham Housing Authority is able to do, which again makes the role of the Needham Housing, the Needham CPA funds all the more important. And then we also have, a lot of uncertainties in the economy. The construction costs have been just crazy, and we're starting to see them come down, fingers crossed, but then as they've been coming down, interest rates have been going up. So it's been really difficult to forecast with any kind of certainty on the numbers. And then, the town meeting, we're gonna be very reliant on the zoning relief being approved, but obviously there's also actions that folks could take to slow up the process that then could push us out further. Major way, changes, the housing authority is gonna need a partner to move forward with, because the equity investor and lender is going to want somebody with a balance sheet that can undertake the risk. And they're usually looking for somebody who, has a net worth of, anywhere $25 million and higher, that can, the project goes sideways, can be able to address and resolve the issue. So there's liquidity and net worth issues that are going to impact NHA and the way they do business. And just we've planned for phase 2 redevelopment of Chambers. But that one is gonna be even more challenging because we're spending a lot of our a lot of our resources on Linden. And so then Chambers, will be even a bigger lift because some of the tools in the toolbox won't be there for Linden, though there's still opportunity to deploy some of the redevelopment activities at High Rock to the benefit of Chambers. And I think I covered the opportunities. And I always go too long, my apologies.
Thanks. Can we maybe take the slide down so we can see Teresa Santa Lucia has a brief next part here. Teresa, you can unmute yourself and we'll look at the pages of the presentation, paper copies here. Take it away from here, please.
Great. So, hi, everyone. I'm Teresa Santa Lucia. I am the newest member of the NHA team. Maybe the least important here. So I will try to correspondingly keep my presentation short. But I'm really pleased to be here with you. Thank you for the opportunity and also for allowing me to join virtually. So I am a partner at Klein Hornig. Klein Hornig is a national law firm that specializes in affordable housing and community development. We are mission driven. That is all we do. We do affordable housing and community development. My particular practice is representing tax exempt organizations that are involved in the preservation and creation of affordable housing. That includes nonprofit organizations and housing authorities. I have represented housing authorities across the country, but have probably in the last 10 years sort of refocused that to Massachusetts. I'm very lucky to have wonderful colleagues at Klein Hornig, and on the slides, I think you will see that a few of the team that I plan to utilize in representing NHA. The first is Dan Rosen, who's a nationally recognized mixed finance public housing expert. The second is Rachel Shack. She's an associate who will be working directly with me. Also, a point of reference, she is a Needham resident. And she's really excited to be working on this project. I also have, I'm very lucky and blessed to have really competent, excellent tax counsel who are very helpful. And Becca Malas is on our roster, and she is also a Needham resident. Finally, I have a partner in DC. His name is Adam Norlander, and he spent a long career at HUD before joining Klein Hornig, and is really kind of a HUD whisperer, and we rely on him a lot. And so I just wanted to kind of point out we have this sort of breadth of experience at the firm, and that, you know, we're all excited to move this project forward. So to go to the next slide. You know, I am a transactional attorney. I help my clients, you know, move a particular property through the various stages that they need to go through in order to, again, preserve or create affordable housing. As part of our transactional work at Klein Hornig, we utilize a wide variety of structures and financing mechanisms. No one project is like another. I feel like, you know, when a client comes to me and says, oh, I have a cookie cutter project, it's really easy. I know that that's going to be a 5-year project and have, you know, its own interesting caveats. But some of the mixed finance public housing redevelopment structuring and financing programs that we have used are public housing revitalization. We have done fair cloth to rad development, which I think this project will be utilizing. And in fact, Dan Rosen was the very first attorney to close a fair cloth to rad project in the US. It was in Galveston, Texas. We do low-income housing tax credits, 9% and 4%. That is sort of a standard fare of our transactions. And we work with a wide variety of HUD programs and processes. Again, like I said, Klein Hornig is a national law firm. My experiences started out on a national, and, you know, just by choice, I really tried to hone that back into Massachusetts. I really enjoy working with projects that I can go to on a regular basis, meet with people in person, walk the properties, really kind of have a more hands-on engagement with. And I've been lucky enough, the Needham Housing Authority invited Rachel and I up right at the very beginning after we were procured as attorneys. And I was able to walk all of the Housing Authority properties and really kind of get a better understanding of the property that we've been talking about tonight. Next slide. So in terms of the redevelopment and my role as attorney for NHA, we were selected by NHA through a process that they went through. And, you know, I think it's not a secret that NHA, you know, doesn't have the financial balance sheet to do this project on their own. You know, doesn't necessarily have the balance sheet that would meet the requirements necessary to draw investors or lenders to this project. And at the same time, they also don't have a real estate department, and they're not experienced in low-income housing tax credits. I will say, however, though, I have been pleasantly surprised again and again by how far NHA has gone in this process, and the amount of work that NHA with CHA as a development consultant have done to get to this point. I mean, it's sort of an extraordinary circumstances. And a lot of times when I come in and work with a housing authority, they are not this far along this pulled together. I have been increasingly impressed by the professionalism and the energy that's gone into bringing this project, you know, this far. So, you know, because of the fact, you know, NHA does not have a balance sheet or the experience, I think that they are rightly looking to partner with an organization that can bring those skills and bring those resources to bear. And I think that
my job, where I have come in is sort of helping NHA sort out what they are requiring in that partnership. I'm there to also kind of give them a sense of what is market for the type of relationship they're looking for. I'm there to help them negotiate the best possible terms for NHA in a reasonable way to make sure that this project also moves forward. So we're always trying to balance, NHA's concerns with a path forward. I am, again, NHA's council, so that's, I want to make sure that that's clear. But I also think that NHA has, expressed a desire to really move this project forward, do the very best it can for the residents that NHA supports, and that, it is a priority of the town. And so I think one of my jobs, as their council, is to take all of that into consideration and try to really help NHA sort through. There does need to be a glossary for all of the various terms and the financing sources, and this is complex stuff. And my job is to sort of help NHA sort through the things that are really the most important points and really help them negotiate the very best deal for NHA, for its residents, and for the town. And I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Matt, and I'll stay here for any questions at the end of the presentation as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matt Zajac. I'm Cambridge Housing Authority's Deputy Director of Planning. I am fortunate to have had experience leading redevelopment projects for public housing authorities, both here in Massachusetts and in the Mid-Atlantic, where I worked with the New York City Housing Authority and the Baltimore Housing Authority. On a day-to-day basis, I am going to be responsible for helping Needham Housing Authority to implement the vision that they have for the Linden and Chambers site, which is a truly exciting one. To close out today, I just wanted to briefly sketch out what the path forward looks like. So we concluded this year with our schematic design process and a community and resident engagement listening series. As we look at the schedule ahead, one thing I just want to emphasize is that our engagement with stakeholders doesn't stop here. It's important to both Cambridge and Needham Housing Authorities that we're continually engaging our partners in order to make sure that the product that we're building delivers on the goals of everyone who it touches. In the first half of 2024, we envision pushing forward the design and our financing readiness in preparation for the annual town meeting. At the annual town meeting, we'll be asking for approval of key zoning and financing requests, including the CPA funding that will help to make the construction of this project possible. Following the town meeting, our hope is to secure site plan approval in July. This would unlock the second half of 2024 being focused on creating detailed construction documents as well as the final financing applications for the project. We expect that in the autumn of 2024, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities would open up their annual funding round, to which we would apply for the sort of the last key in the ignition to start this project up. The full application is generally due in the first quarter of the year, so that would be the first part of 2025. And during this period, we would also be putting together our the rest of our financing stack by releasing a request for proposal for debt and equity partners. We would select a general contractor and work with them to bid out the construction documents. The goal of this burst of activity is to have the project ready to start construction in the second quarter of 2025. We hope that we'll be in a position to break ground around May of 2025 for phase 1A of the project. This is the 76 units plus elevator core and the related community spaces. Construction of that part of the project will take 16 months, leading to roughly the last quarter of 2026. At that point, we'll be able to relocate the residents who are in the remaining buildings on site into the new building. and start construction on the last phase of the project, phase 1B. Its 60 units will take slightly shorter amount of time, 12 months. The entire project, we hope to have wrapped up in November of 2027. Development is a slow process, and often these dates shift as we move through the predecessor steps. So one thing that we're committed to doing is continuing to update the group on this timeline as we move forward and it shifts. Our slides here present this information in a different visual format, and we'll make sure that this is distributed to everyone after the meeting. With that, I think I just want to speak for the group and say that we're really grateful for your time and excited to take any questions.
Oh, question.
I want to do this, Kathy.
You have a question, why don't you ask it?
I
I know
got-
you have that.
I got a bunch, so if I could. And you can cut me off anytime you want. You talked about, Matt, he's talked about the spring of 2025, and that's, and I put triple asterisk beside it, that's really contingent on the acceptance of the winter rental round of funding from the state. I'm assuming if we're not successful, this whole project slips a year. Is that a fair assumption?
I think that generally that's a fair assumption. It's not uncommon for projects to have to apply in subsequent rounds because as Margaret talked about, it's an extremely competitive funding environment. The state does have multiple funding rounds per year, and if we were unsuccessful in the winter round, we would attempt to find another funding source either through their public housing round, which is something they're implementing this year, or and I'm forgetting the name for it, the special round they do in order to make sure we don't lose a whole year.
Okay.
And I'll just jump in and say as well that sometimes because there's such strong interest in moving the property out of the state public housing program, funding that wasn't identified becomes available. And so, an example I can give is in Medford, the state public housing program actually gave us additional funding so that we didn't have to go through
Right.
the winter round. And so, I wouldn't say all hope would be lost if we didn't get it. They also came out, and Representative may know this is a Housing Works program that, we had thought about applying for Needham this year, but I think the town had a higher priority application, but that would be something too, that if we applied for next year and were successful in getting, could alleviate the need for the housing production funding. So you will be continuing to look at other resources, you don't count on, you look at whatever's available. And, we had great success with the Brockton and Medford Housing Authority on those Housing Works grants. We ended up getting about $6.8 million between the two housing authorities for that program. So that would, again, I think be a good fit for Needham, and it could also alleviate some of that need for the ERHLC funding.
Okay, the second question I had, you first reversed to one of the slides, and I think it's slide number 31, where it talks about the development sources and uses of funds. And the list of, on that slide, I don't know if it's easy to get up on the screen, but anyways, the list of pre-development costs total up to the 2.636 million, that's the one. I'm assuming those numbers on the right are estimates of budget numbers, is that correct?
Or actual cost.
Yeah, I mean, is it? which
So
one-
we have like the A&E contract, we've already negotiated that.
So that's the final number?
That's a real number, other
Okay.
than if there's, like, for instance, if we go forward with design development and town meeting votes a different zoning plan,
Yeah.
that's a risk the project would take, and then if we choose to do that, and if we had to go and redesign to, dot an I or T that comes out of the zoning, the firm would be owed
Okay,
additional money.
could I
that-
just ask as a follow-up
Yep.
then, could you guys indicate which numbers of these are actuals? And which ones are still estimates? And for those that are partially expended,
Mhm.
let us know where it is on the expenditure number, so that we can just kind of verify what the costs are, the pre-development costs are as we go forward. And I'm assuming that you'll be using the contingency money for any scope changes or things like that.
Exactly, that's why it's there.
That you had, we talked about that earlier. But yeah, if you could break that down, and then have you submitted?
Kathy, can I just interrupt just as a process question? Would be really helpful if, your staff can sort of take all these questions and write them down. And also maybe the members who aren't here tonight might have some questions after they watch the video. And then give us one consolidated list and we'll take notes and start working on them. That just, is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was planning on following it up with a written set of questions anyways, based on a future discussion. But if you could do that, and then with respect to that, have you submitted any requests for reimbursement from the town yet for any of these costs?
We have not.
Okay, and when do you anticipate that taking place?
So there's a complicated answer to that.
Okay.
That
Don't
involves
answer it
what
now.
we do and the town does and Cambridge Housing Authority does and so forth. And DHCD, by the way, is in there as well. But it'll be soon.
Okay, and you have some type of cost reporting system that you use to
Yes.
track all of this, right?
Right.
So is that available?
Well, not to log into, but to
No,
create
no.
reports, yes.
Yeah, that's fine, thanks. And the other one, and I'll summarize the rest of the questions later because I don't want to take up everybody's time. But in your original application last year, you had an outside boundary for capital costs, all in of $70 million. That increased to 79 million on the concept design phase, and then on the schematic design went up to 83.9, and that's inclusive of inflation as you see it today. What you explained what the 79 to 83 was. What's the difference between the 70 and 79? And I'm assuming it's got to do with the 8-bedroom, 8 units of 2 bedrooms.
No,
Nothing to do with
nothing to
that.
do with that. Actually makes the cost less.
Okay.
And not intuitive.
Then don't answer that now.
But no, I'll just give you a quick answer, which is, I think that if I know that what you're referring to, the
Yeah, the
estimate.
last.
It was, it was at the very beginning of the year, the first month or two or three, we were just getting going with Dan's team. And so there were top-down estimating happening in order to produce those estimates. And then we started to get some real design and a real cost estimator who was looking at this on a detailed basis. And then it was quite a surprise, actually, a huge surprise that the conceptual design costed out to actually even more than what was there. And we had a value engineering exercise to it down. But again, things are very unpredictable due to the disruptions, the COVID pandemic disruptions, and everybody's been really jerked around in the last year.
I appreciate.
But
that.
it's
Thank
not, it's not what you were.
No, that's fine. That's okay. And what I'll do is I'll follow this up with a whole bunch of questions. I don't want to
Yeah,
take
we
everybody's
can
time.
figure out collectively the right process to get these questions to you in a written format.
I'll go. So the total budget you have, it comes out to 616,000 a unit. Have you, I've not heard of anyone getting that kind of money approved per
Oh.
unit.
I've heard over $900,000 per unit.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I have not. So that's interesting. Where is $900,000? Where?
But Boston has had some in that level for sure. I mean, again, as a public agency, we're bound to pay prevailing wage, so that makes our cost higher. We do, again, fortunately, with the vote of the legislature last November, have the ability to not follow 149 or 149A. And so we're hoping to see some savings there, and I think that's reflected in some of the numbers. As I said, the passive house and energy code standards have really, we've seen great increases in those. So, the numbers are as accurate as we can make them, and quite honestly, much lower than what I see in Cambridge.
Okay, so another question, I'm just wondering, I will attest to the fact that I actually know Teresa. We work together. And I'm thrilled that she's working on this project with Needham Housing Authority. So I guess, and I don't quite understand. So you responded to the RFP and you've been working till now, but now there's gonna be an agreement written. So Teresa, can you give us a little bit of an understanding of what parameters, like, have all the financial pieces been outlined already? Have they already been agreed to, or is this a negotiate? What is this agreement?
Yeah, so I'm sure Margaret can also jump in, but Cambridge Housing Authority was hired as a consultant. So they have been consulting to NHA and they have been working on all of this information. And that's one of the reasons why, when I came in, I was actually kind of astounded at how far, Needham Housing Authority had got in this process, because they had been really working diligently, over years with Cambridge Housing Authority. They're now at a point where they need to now move that forward into an actual development process. And so they came to a discussion of, do we go out and we put out an RFP? How do we select a developer? And I think and maybe Reg could even talk about this in terms of their process, but they decided to move forward with Cambridge Housing Authority first to see, to start the initial discussions about a development agreement between the two. And so there has been an initial proposal, and now we are working through actual and this is where I've come in, and where I've started to really get into the project, is actually negotiating those deal terms between NHA and CHA within the context of a development agreement. So that there would be a development agreement that would be answered, and we would shift from the consulting to an actual established relationship of NHA hiring a developer for the project.
I can add another sentence or two, and then,
That's helpful.
and we can answer it in writing as well too. So, we've known for years that we needed a development partner. I mean, that's always been part of the game plan. And, otherwise there'd be no project. And so at a certain point along the road after 2021, like 2022, going into 23, we basically had an analysis done on the choices of development partners, and there are very big national private sector firms like Trinity and Wynn and so forth. You know who they are. There is another category, which are smaller regional partners that we could do. There's a third category, which are large and medium-sized nonprofit developers that you could choose from, all again very well known and reputable. And then there was the fourth possibility of the Cambridge Housing Authority as being transitioning to be our development partner, because that's what they're now doing for other housing authorities and so forth. And we had an analysis done, a white paper written up in the April or May board meeting. We did a 2-hour basically offsite board meeting trying to decide which way we wanted to go. And the board unanimously said, we want, there's always the option of going forward with one of these other partners, but we unanimously want to go forward with Cambridge Housing Authority, and let's start exploring that. But before we could do that, we also took the decision, and honestly recommended by our development consultant, that we need to engage special counsel, which turned out to be Klein and Hornig, that took all summer to do, and here we go. So we are in negotiations now for this agreement.
Great, very helpful, thank you.
So, is Klein Hornig also going to be negotiating with that tax credit, low-income housing tax credit partner? Is that part of their scope of responsibility, or is
Margaret or
is there scope of representation just to negotiate the deal between that Needham Housing Authority and the Cambridge Housing Authority?
Let's test Ridge's knowledge. No, but the development partner does that and their counsel. However, we decided there are continuing things that we're going to be asked to agree to or consult on or so forth. So the scope of Teresa's engagement covers us on an ongoing basis for the indefinite future here, to provide us the kind of advice we need to complete the deal.
I guess I don't understand that answer. Teresa, can you help me with that?
Sure.
Thanks.
So currently NHA is kind of driving the bus. Once they enter into an agreement with a development partner, which, you know, in this case, we're talking with CHA, they would begin to drive the bus, but we don't get off the bus, right? We still have our interest. We want to make sure that the property is in fact being developed with the appropriate partners, appropriate finance. And NHA will have several different roles. One, they'll be a lender, so they'll need representation. You know, they will be on the closing calls. They will be part of the closing transaction because they will be a lender. They will be a ground lessor, so they will provide a ground lease to the property, and so that's another avenue for them to be able to make sure that the property is going to be developed, you know, in a manner consistent with their original intentions. They are also getting a share of the developer fee, and so they have interest there, right? So they will also be making sure that you know, we will be looking at the financials, we will be looking at the development every step of the way. And then finally, there's the right of first refusal. There's this option at the end of the year 15 tax credit compliance period where there's an opportunity for the sponsor of the project to you know, reclaim the property back and bring it back into the fold. And you know, the Needham Housing Authority, you know, is having that right as well. So we'll want to make sure that that's protected at the early stages of the closing. Make sure that, you know, in year 15 we have solid documentation that will allow us to continue with that process. So, you know, while the development will be run and managed, and we'll have a team on the developer side, NHA's role doesn't stop. They will still be part of that development process. Does that answer your question?
I guess in part, I was just actually that's pretty expansive. I was just trying to get a sense of who, it seems like there's a negotiation that has to go on between the Cambridge Housing Authority and the Needham Housing Authority.
Correct.
Just on the most basic level. And your firm is representing the Needham Housing Authority in that interest.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay, and then with all the, and all the other ancillary issues that you're gonna represent the housing authority on.
But when it gets to the time where we're negotiating deal documents, there'll be probably another outside counsel that would be negotiating that deal document, but Fine Hoarding in their role representing the Needham Housing Authority would be involved in the review of the documents.
So there'd be like finance counsel involved in.
Yeah, usually we have, you know, a number of outside counsels that we work with that, you know, represents the interest that the deal documents are coming through with the lenders or the investors.
So if I may ask, what's the status of these negotiations between the housing authority and Cambridge Housing Authority? Or let me put it another way, is there some sort of timeline? Because it's not mentioned in the timeline when it doesn't actually state when we're gonna have a selection of a low-income housing tax credit partner in that timeline. And it also doesn't say when we're gonna have a developer in place either. So if I could get some sense of that.
I can say, I'd rather not say a lot publicly about the specific negotiations in a public meeting.
Sure, I get it.
And
It's just a
but
timeline.
if I could just be general, I think we're meeting frequently right now with the goal of concluding some sort of agreement by February. And there will be more to be done after that. I think, and as to the tax credit part of his answer, what would be the timeline?
That actually is in the schedule, and we would be, you know, again, assuming that we'd be having a spring 2025 starting date, we would be
Not mention it.
yeah, we would be reaching out to an investor lender starting in about this time next year.
Can I do a follow-up question? Yeah, please. Understanding that we don't want to get into any details, I have one question. It seems to me that this is it's a financial negotiation primarily. It's a legal and financial negotiation. And I guess my only question is, does Needham Housing Authority need any type of additional assistance with the financial negotiation portion of this, in addition to Teresa? I mean, typically Teresa gets that assistance outside. So I don't know if there's a need for, that's what it is. It's mostly a financial and delivery of services negotiation. So that's my question. Is
Rhonda,
there
are
any-
you talking about an accounting firm, or are you talking about a consultant who looks at the financial aspects?
Well, there's rules of thumb about what gets paid for development fees and how, where you do mortgages and how, who pays what. And I guess that's all pieces of things that need to be negotiated. I mean, I'm very concerned looking at these finances that, the Needham Housing Authority doesn't end up with any money at the end and has a fee owed and no income to pay it. So I'm just, there's a very serious financial negotiation that has to happen so that the Needham Housing Authority at the end of this process has the wherewithal to maintain and move forward to the next phase. And has some financial capacity to do that. So that's my only one concern, is that in this negotiation, just to be sure that those pieces are being overseen. And that everyone's getting remunerated. Thank you, fairly. So I just didn't know if there's any additional assistance that might be needed, that's all.
Well, I would rely on Teresa to take that as good advice from you, but I think that we're certainly very well aware and into the weeds of those discussions.
Great.
Without getting into any specifics of what that.
Don't want to do.
Yeah, except I can say that maybe the two sides have slightly different ideas of what the right answer is in that there. That's all I want to say about it. But we're going to work at resolving that and getting a fair and balanced deal for both sides, because the essence of a really good deal going forward is something's win-win, and we're spending a lot of these early meetings just walking the mile in the shoes of the other side, trying to understand what the issues are.
Great. Really, that's good to hear.
Denise, do you have some questions? I'm good. Avery?
All set. I'm happy to think about any, send them in writing. Nothing that needs to be addressed here tonight, though.
I did have one question, which is sort of a basic one. Which is, what do you need to secure in terms of funding to secure the other funding? Like, what is sort of the key here? Is there a key thing that once you get it, other things fall into place? Is it all?
I mean, I think the key is gonna be the public housing, EOHLC funding and the CPA funding are gonna be probably.
Can you say what item number that is, line number?
Let me go, it's line number C1 and then C7,
Oh, on page 31?
Yeah. 33, actually.
33.
For to Margaret, but I like to think about it like a snowball. And I think that the thing that this project is really grateful for is that it's secured the initial seed capital that makes the applications that we've put forward, for instance, to the state for the public housing innovations money seem credible. So it's then these next larger steps when that larger group of CPA money, that EOHLC money gets awarded, suddenly that puts us in the conversation for the bond financing, which is the really challenging piece to finally slot together and then start construction.
And then the other key piece that gets the state to the table is the fair cloth units that the housing authority will be generating from Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook, because that's the underlying subsidy that will be used at.
Could you mention what a fair cloth unit is?
That's another one of the glossaries.
Yeah.
So HUD established a cap for every housing authority nationally of what it could have for federal public housing. So Needham's cap is exactly the number of federal public housing units you have, 136. But with the repositioning activities that HUD has made available to housing authority, there are some repositioning activities that when you do it, you lose your fair cloth. If you take a unit off of federal public housing, your fair cloth number goes down 1 for 1. But there's another option that they have that allows you to take the unit off of the federal public housing program, but maintain your fair cloth. Basically, you don't get the funding because you don't have a unit it's attached to, but it's dormant. But it gives you the right to find a unit and attach it to it. And becomes a valuable way to increase the amount of federal dollars coming to your community. And so when we've been looking at the Seabeds and Captain Robert Cook repositioning strategies, we've been looking at it kind of at a portfolio-wide level to see kind of, I'll call it cross collateralization or cross benefiting to how it could be used to help with the financing, because absent the fair cloth units, you would not have a foothold into EOHLC for any public housing innovation money. And the fact that you have some, is that carrot to entice them to the table. And it was the carrot really that enticed them to the table on that Medford transaction.
And can I ask two leading questions, because I have to explain this every day to everybody for a couple of years. One is, how much is a fair cloth, a unit of subsidy worth, roughly speaking, what's its value? Is it $10?
No, it's
Or
about
$1,000,000?
about $900 per unit per month, so
Or annually then?
annually, and then forever.
So it's 10 at 9, 12 or.
Yeah.
Nearly $11,000 per year. Forever into the cash flow, the P&L. The second one is, you mentioned repositioning several times. I know some people know what that is. I've come to think of it as, we've been funded on the federal side by the old public housing program ever since day one, federal public housing program. And it's sometimes referred to as Title IX. And we are putting in an application that will pick us up and put us into another federal public housing program that everybody's heard of, but not in this capacity, Section 8. And it's another part of the Section 8 program that we know provides vouchers. So attached to tenants, they're called mobile vouchers, that they can take to any landlord who's willing to take it and get subsidized housing that way. Well, we can do that too. So we are repositioning over time, starting with Seabeds and Cook, our federal public housing from Section 9 to Section 8. And that means, and then there have, a number of different ways that can be done, but there is one way to do it where once you get to Section 8 and you don't need those fair cloth units anymore, they just go into the bank as dormant subsidy units. And the way we're doing it, we get 60 of the 76. We have 76 units at Seabeds and Cook. 60 of them goes into the bank and gets plopped down as part of a financial closing as a blended chambers that makes the numbers, makes the land cake possible with all the other sources here.
I would just add, if this all sounds awfully Byzantine and like a maze that no one's gonna escape, I think we're really fortunate both to have NHA's council, who did some of the first fair cloth to RAD transactions, and also Cambridge. We've successfully implemented this strategy with our 116 Norfolk project for supportive housing in the last year, and we think it's really the future to kind of transition housing forward.
I'll just
And
also
then-
say, one other thing, just to get back to the question about like, what is that catalyst? Like what's that thing that makes the dominoes start to fall? At any given time, there are several dozen projects that are knocking on the gates of HLC for funding, right? And HLC every year goes through their rounds and awards funding. And once they kind of sign on, yep, this is a project that we want to fund, things start to fall in place. And some of the things that they look at, are site control, which we have here. We have the site. We know who controls it. NHA is going to have the site. Then they look at capacity. Is there a team? Has a team been assembled? And I think tonight is a good example that a team is assembled, they want to make sure that there's experience. They want to make sure that they're working together, that there's agreements as to how they're going to work together. So pulling together that team in a cohesive way. And then finally, a lot of times they're looking for community support. Does the community have some skin in the game? Is it a welcomed development in the community? How is it being received? Has there been stakeholder meetings? Are they well informed about the project, right? So those are kind of three really important pieces that when you go knocking for those funds, that you have kind of wrapped up and a bow on top, because they're really important. And I think that's kind of where we are in that stage right now. I think that NHA and CHA as their consultants are kind of pulling all of that together so that it's going to be a well-presented project when it goes to HLC for that funding. And once that funding happens, all of the funding starts to kind of line up.
Kathy, if I could just follow up on your question just for a moment. And this is more related to the CPC approval of the 5.5 million you're going to be requesting. That money, right now anyways, I don't believe based on last year's closing of the CPC accounts is available. I think there's only roughly about $4 million in the housing, about 3.2 million in the housing bucket now. And with additional funds to be added probably some point in time this year. And, you know, I'm sure there's gonna be some other competing interests down the road. So if that 5.5 isn't approved or isn't available, where do you make up that money?
We continue to look for, as I said, you know, any ways that we can find additional resources. As I mentioned, you know, there's a possibility of housing works that we could substitute out the EOHL money, but maybe that substitutes out, you know, a portion of the CPA funds. But the stack is, you know, it's not like we haven't explored a lot of the stack.
Sure, right.
And at some point, you're gonna reach the point of, there's not anything more we can do.
So
And
is this
we're
the
close.
optimum size development, or can you scale back?
We
the
could,
numbers?
I mean, we could do a 1A. I mean, you know, we could always do 1A by itself. And in fact, you know, I think, you know, assembling that funding would be a little bit easier, but you'll have the 76 units, so you'll have replaced the 72 that you have. But you won't have had any increase, and you'd have the ability to do that second piece down the road.
Yeah, we had talked about that. At
Yeah.
one point.
Yeah.
You guys obviously in the process made the decision to move forward.
Yeah, it'll be much less expensive if we can do it all in one transaction than it would be if we did it in, you know, as a separate transaction.
Yeah.
Having to assemble a whole second, so that's the best outcome, but is there a fallback position? Yes, there is.
And Rick, I just want to, for the record, clarify that you're proposing a hypothetical situation,
Oh, yeah.
not an actual situation.
Yeah.
A question? Okay, well, thank you all for coming and making this presentation.
I do have one more
Yeah,
comment
yeah,
though.
sorry,
I
please.
just want to say, having been involved in ways that I can in this project. Certainly as a town meeting member, somebody who was present for the High Rock Estates, and the first money we ever generated for that was $19,000. And out of that, we leveraged a tremendous amount of money, but it was at 19,000, 10 million.
Yeah,
What was
10
it?
million
Yeah.
total, yeah,
Yeah.
just under 10 million.
And it was that $19,000 from the community that actually, from the nonprofit, that instilled the confidence in the community. The community then put in $250,000 as town meeting members, and that was leveraged piece by piece into $10 million. But that contribution from the community, that show of support from the community,
Yeah.
was what made the dominoes fall in all of that. But in my own discussions and in my trying to understand how we were moving forward, I just want to reiterate how very pleased I am that this team is present. We certainly have tremendous history with the architect and architectural firm, but I want folks to know that the tremendous respect that the Cambridge Housing Authority is held in at the state level. In every entity that I've talked to, there is tremendous trust, the experience is there. And most important in the state relations is those relationships have been established and tested. And I think that will stand the project in great stead. So I particularly am so very pleased to see this presentation tonight and this team coming together.
No, I just want to thank you all for coming out here, taking the time. I feel so much better informed now than I did before. And I know we'll have follow-up questions, but this is excellent for us,
And we'll
to get this
continue to
foundational.
hone our message and get our acronyms all spelled out. As we really appreciate it, as you know, I used to say it was 2 or 3 dimensional chess. I think it's up to 6 dimensional chess now. And so we do it every day for folks who don't do it every day. You know, I think it can be overwhelming. So I really appreciate your attention and time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the time and thank you for the volunteer effort that you folks are putting in because we need the help. So, you know, it takes a village, right? Right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. next and last on our agenda is,
So can we just, yeah,
Yeah.
after our folks, leave,
Yeah.
I want to discuss this question. How we handle questions and. I would just like to propose for the committee members, if we are generating questions, that all questions go through one source and every committee member has a full document that has all of the questions that have been asked. And that we're always communicating through one source, to get information.
So we usually do that through staff, right? That's
Yeah,
what-
that's usually what we
We
do.
just kind of funnel everything through staff
Mhm.
and, that.
yeah, so Katie, would you guys be able to take that on?
Yeah, I'm happy to compile them, and I guess one of the points of discussion for next steps is also, again, kind of CPC's going through the due diligence process. So I guess one of the questions I have for the group is, they're obviously willing to respond to questions directly. But there may be some questions that are, we could send to CPC for them to add into their process as well. So we don't have to decide that now, but I think it makes sense to just.
I took a quick look at
Mhm.
the first round of information requests from the CPC. And there's probably gonna be some questions that are overlapping.
Mhm.
Like in particular with respect to the breakdown of the, where they spent the funds so far.
Mhm.
And obviously they spent it, but they haven't sent any vouchers in, so,
Right.
that,
I would just try to stay loosely in our lane.
Right.
Okay.
Very much.
Can we talk about that, the
Okay,
lane?
and
Yeah, what would be what does that mean in this case? Does that mean combining the questions or not combining the questions?
Talking.
oh, definitely.
Linear.
No, I meant,
Experience.
do we combine the questions?
With
CPC?
CPC.
Oh, I think that we could do that. That's true. I
Yeah.
think but I think that's true. We could combine the.
I mean, I
questions
think
with
that might be
CPC.
time efficient for the NHA not to have to respond to two
Right.
oh, yeah.
different
For sure.
entities, so I think that's maybe preferable.
It is, to acknowledge that, but what I think the rep was saying is to make sure that you all have the same information, that you're all seeing your full list before we send it anywhere else. Is that?
That is exactly what I was saying.
So is our lane money? What is our lane?
Our lane is advisory to the board of selectmen. So
So,
we're,
but what do we advise? Thank you, yes.
Yeah,
And
but
are
I
we
mean-
advising them that this is a really great project and it's gonna meet the needs of the town? Are we advising them that the money that they're being asked to spend is being spent wisely? What is it?
My interpretation of this is that it is the oversight of the town money. That-
Financial.
Yeah, that since we are not in charge of building this ourselves, but we are contributing money, that that there's a need to just make sure that we have oversight on that. And that I view that as supportive of the mission, so that if there are questions from select board or FinCom or town meeting, that those questions can be answered.
Okay, and expanding on that, is it in our purview to advise as to whether or not, when this is done, the Needham Housing Authority will be in good financial condition to manage going forward and potentially taking on the next phase of the project? And Cook and Robert Cook and Seabed. Am I understood?
I pulled up the charts just if it's
Yeah, so
helpful.
let's just go back to the chart.
Share it with folks on Zoom.
I'm gonna go on the other side of the room.
Yes, please
Wow,
feel free to
very
spread out.
strange. Okay.
So I think the first bullet, that's
Right.
first part of your question.
So I think the reason I asked the second part of the question is, one of the concerns I came after looking at this pro forma is that the project generates, based on this, $100,000 a year, and we owe and Cambridge Housing Authority, now this has not been negotiated, so that has a deferred fee of $700,000. That doesn't leave Needham Housing Authority with any cash flow from this project to keep going with anything else. It doesn't get any of that's why I'm saying it's gonna be negotiated. And that's important. That's why I was asking that question, but Needham Housing Authority, and typically, I mean, usually the money that's paid up front, some portion of it would stay in the project, but frequently pre-development money comes back. And so we just need to be very aware. I would say that it would be a good purview of this group to understand the cash flows and where the Needham Housing Authority will be at the end of the project. And how they'll be able to pay their bills and make sure that they can manage and maintain their properties. And have some potential money to go into the next project. So that's just, those were my concerns after reading this performance. I think that the great news is that Klein Corning is very good, and I'm assuming we'll manage some of that with the housing authority.
So my concern about that kind of analysis and that expectation is that, you're fortunate to have the expertise in that area, so you can read the pro forma and do a calculation in your head and see whether the deal works or it doesn't work. I think that in my mind, that's particularly something that the consultant that CPC has retained would be, that seems like a question for CPC and to have the consultant explore.
Absolutely.
And that information that we get from that though could be, it would be helpful for us to have that information. But I also think that that's something that CPC should look, because one of the charges for CPC is one of the subjective factors in our plan is to see whether or not this is beneficial to the long-term health of the requesting agency or the town.
Mhm.
That's what they're supposed to do over there. So, I think that's
As long
great.
as someone does it.
Yeah, no, I think that's, so that, I don't mean to talk, I don't mean to, speak out of turn, but I think that that's a great question, but I also think it's something, a great issue, but I think it's something that we can rely on an expert that CBC has in place to do that.
I agree, and I'd asked if we had a report from that
Yeah.
as well. All right.
And this might be simplifying it too much. But in my mind, we're very much involved in this capital project, right? The Needham Housing Authority has an operating budget, right? They're gonna continue to be operating all through this. They will be operating afterwards. They make their money in that process, right? So the Needham Housing Authority is not a town entity, right? The town doesn't control the day-to-day operations of the Needham Housing Authority, right? We're involved in this capital project. And when Peter's saying that we need to stay in our lanes, I think over and over again, we have to clarify what our lane is.
I agree. I've been trying to figure that out. I know that, in this pro forma, Needham Housing Authority is providing a loan of $6.8 million. Does the Needham Housing Authority have $6.8 million? I don't know.
Yeah, so, all right, that's a good question to ask. There is an answer to that, and it has to do with the repositioning of Seabed and Cook. And so, but there, I didn't think tonight was, I thought.
It was great.
Great example.
It was a great.
But it's a great example of, you can get a little dig in a little deeper on those particular questions and explain it. For example, the other thing is, and one timing element is the repositioning of Seabed and Cook. Because it's supposed to spin off the Faircloth Brads, right? And it's also supposed to be in a position where they're gonna be making this loan. So that project over there is something that we need to investigate in terms of timing, it seems to me. But I don't wanna get too deep in the weeds about that, but I think we can put all those
And
questions
on that
together.
lane thing, I'm just always mindful, right? We are advisory to the select board. We are not advisory to the CPA committee, right? But we certainly can work in partnership with them. And because time is our most valuable resource, there shouldn't be any need for any duplication of effort. They can show us their questions. We can say, these are additional questions that we think need to be posed. Thank you for this. And we can streamline that kind of thing. But we're not advisory to the CPA committee. That's not our charge.
So I guess I'm still questioning, what is it we're so,
But that's
what
pretty
we're
soft. I think we have a
advising.
really soft footprint on the question, really soft footprint on the question of advice, really,
Yeah.
right? But then, but a bigger footprint on the question of what we said.
Yeah, I think, if I could just chime in here, I think the fact that they're looking at the town to fund this project to a level of 6.9 million dollars total right now, and this is just for phase 1A and 1B. They're clearly down the road gonna come back for more money. And so at some point, I think, part of our role is kind of representing the town and to a degree, asking the questions to protect the town. If for whatever answer, at every point in time, this would ever to go belly up, or there's a problem with the financing, or the project falls through for whatever reason, and in spite of everybody's best efforts, it could happen. And I'm just concerned that we really need to just kind of keep our eye on that as we go forward. And that was one of the reasons why I asked the question about, well, you're looking for 5.5 million, what happens if you don't get it? They came out with some thoughts in the write-up that I read, that they want to have the town back a financing proposal to fund that money, similar to what we did with the town hall. And to the best of my knowledge, and Dave can attribute to that or not, but I don't think we can do that as a town. We can't legally fund another entity to go do that out of the CPA funds. But, that's one of their ideas about if we can't get $5.5 million in cash out of the CPA fund, then why don't we have the CPA provide some debt financing to the project and we fund it over the course of time? And I'm not sure that that's even a realistic expectation. And if that's some of the things that they're proposing, I just want to make sure that we know what's going on. That's all. I think that's why we have some responsibility there.
Dave, is there any thoughts on that?
I think it was somebody who wasn't thinking through what they were requesting, because I do know the housing authority knows the town of Needham cannot issue debt and then spend that money, the Needham Housing Authority, the town, because of federal and state prohibitions. And if there was something that the laws would change, there is a detriment to the community of Needham that, just like us co-signing a loan for our child or something, that impacts our ability to borrow. We have some substantial capital projects that are going to be financed by debt. So even if it was legal, even if it was doable, it would not be in the best interest of the overall community to be issuing bonds to the housing authority. That's their responsibility. The most important key of the committee, which is like what it's looking for, is the investment of whatever number of dollars that the town's going to contribute through its CPA fund. Are we going to realize the housing that the Needham Housing Authority is saying they're going to produce? And in the end, that's what we're advising.
So in a sense, that goes beyond oversight of the specific dollars that we have spent to the risk of the whole project. If I understand that, right? Because
I would say,
because if we put however many, 5, 6, 7 million into this, if the risk is that it doesn't happen, then that money doesn't get what we want. So there is an element of oversight of the dollars spent, but just some oversight of the risk.
So this, I don't know. At what point does the monies get exercised? Right, there's various points here where people are committing to the money, right? But when does the money get exercised? Right, so let's say we've committed to this money for some unforeseeable reason, we don't see a finalized project.
Well, the pre-development money
Is the money at risk?
Right.
But we already have the pre-development.
but I
Right, I'm
think,
saying
but I
that
think to answer the question though directly is we have given money as a CPC to outside agencies in the past. And the money doesn't get dispersed until they submit the request. That's why I asked whether they had submitted any requests for funds yet. So technically, they haven't really submitted any requests for funds of that 1.386 million that we've asked for. Similarly, if we authorize them 5.5 now or in the future, they don't get that money until they submit substantiated invoices to the town and it's validated.
So in my world, there's the two-step, you authorize the money and then you appropriate the money, right? Right now, we're at the phase of authorizing money. Is this money that we believe we should authorize out of the CPA fund, right? When does it get appropriated? That's my question.
So my understanding from our consultant is that the next tranche is just basically not gonna be at risk, because the money is not gonna be appropriated until the closing on the finances in the entire.
Yeah.
project.
That's right.
Oh,
Right,
well, then
so
that's
we're,
reassuring.
the ink is, we're gonna have a wet signature before, and where they're gonna be ready to roll before our money, our 5.5 is, that's not how it goes.
There is no way. I don't think that, unless they're saying that they're gonna get to closing with $2.6 million, that means that they're gonna get through design development. They are right now having their architect and engineer doing work that is not.
It's not
typically-
funded yet.
Well, and also is not typically architect and engineer. This is usually the developer does a lot of the work that the architects and engineers doing.
Yes.
Right, in this project.
That's
So
right.
if I find it hard to imagine that you're gonna get to design development in this budget for this project with the subcontracting team doing all of these pieces that are typically done by the development team.
And that's why I wanted to get the answer to the question about what money has been expended out of that 2.8. Because then you find out where they are, and if they've made commitments, that's why I asked if they have a cost report. If they made commitments for future expenditures, they don't have the money for yet.
Well, they have two other sources of funds that are available.
They have that
They have the developer fee.
1.5 number.
They have the developer fee that we earned on High Rock. I don't know what the status of that is. I was gonna ask them. I didn't want to dig in too deep. I'll ask them in writing, but somewhere in the sources and uses of funds, that money has to be there. And number two, the Partnership for Growth money, they've never made an
That's
application.
$1.5 million, right?
It's 1.5
Yeah.
million, which was, I wanna, this is a first, I wanna read to you an FAQ.
Okay, good.
Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
This is related to the first application, the 1.3387. This is written by the Housing Authority. Are there any matching funds from non-Needham taxpayer sources? Answer, the Needham CPA funds will enable NHA to leverage the utilization of 1.25 million ARPA funding and 1.5 million Partnership for Growth obligation to complete all pre-development tasks for the Linden Street and Chambers Street properties. So, this is a little bit of a drum I've been banging a little, but that 1.5 has not been used in
That may be
pre-development.
where they're getting the rest of the money.
But that was money that's available and that they represented was available for pre-development costs.
Right.
So
That's great.
This is,
Both those monies.
both of those
monies.
ones.
yeah, so I think that's why I think it's important for us to just continue
That'll
to
get-
follow this
Mhm.
along
And
this
it's, that's real
line.
money.
And it may not be, just look at what we've spent already, but look to the future and what it's gonna evolve into. And that's why I just, a lot of times I'll ask some questions that are really looking for answers down the road.
Well, I think it's also what Katie mentioned earlier in the meeting, that we can start with the oversight of the initial CPA
Right,
funding, right?
Yeah.
And then understand where they are, and then the task changes a bit, assuming that town meeting, votes.
yeah, I'm assuming that the select board and the finance committee and those other committees that we're responsible to help advise are gonna be asking us for some of this thought process that we have. So I just wanna make sure, not only that, we might have town meeting members that ask some of these questions.
Yes, and that's why that's why I see this as actually supportive of the project, because
Yeah.
people will have those
Oh,
questions.
yeah.
And if those questions go unanswered, you will have people that lose, faith,
Yeah.
right? And no longer support. if they
Yeah,
don't
and that's,
Get answers to their questions.
absolutely, I think that's key, because that's, honestly, that's what, is our role when we're serving on the CPA committee together. one of our roles is to pretend we're town meeting members and ask some of the questions that we anticipate town meeting members are gonna wanna ask and have answers for. And so even in our presentations, we tried to, present this and short circuit some of those questions by having the answers already up front. And that's just, it's just another role that I think a lot of these committees and us as well serve as in town government. And that's really, I think, the value add that we provide here, and I wouldn't back away from that.
So do we think that there's a value to this group? Having anything, helping, this negotiation between, the Needham Housing Authority and, CHA is critical to this project.
That's right.
So I don't know if we have any influence over it or should have any influence over it or anything, but that is going to be, that is going to define the fees we pay that are paid to them and the cost of having them as a developer. So I don't know what influence we should or shouldn't have. I'm not suggesting I have a clue, but I'm just saying that is going to be a critical document to the whole project. Because right now they have a lot of money in this for themselves.
They being,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've been trying to do that for myself, because it's again, another issue where if it were a town agency, we would be involved in that negotiation.
Right.
And we would be protecting our investment in that way. But really, we're an outside funder. I don't know. I mean, at a minimum, I was gonna say, I want to see the agreement, but you got to see that. And that may influence whether or not what amount we're willing to fund, I suppose. It may influence, I suppose.
It could.
But your point is a good one too, which is that I think that, the lawyer is supposed to be, and Teresa did make a reference that she looked at what market is.
Yeah.
So transactional lawyers do often have a sense of what market is, and this is her mission, this is her specialty, this is all she does, so she does know what market is. But their traditional role is to turn deal terms into legal documents.
Right.
With the deal terms
Right.
being negotiated by sophisticated players on the side.
Right, so if this was my project, I would be working with I would be giving her the terms, not asking her to develop the terms, which is why I was saying, I don't know if there's someone at Needham Housing Authority that can tell them, negotiate the terms. I don't have my lawyers negotiate the terms usually.
Right.
But I will say Teresa is very knowledgeable, so that helps, but, usually you have a business person on your team to negotiate the terms.
So that appears to be something that's lacking with the housing authority.
I'm not right.
Okay.
So that is the importance to us of the Cambridge Housing Authority being involved, right? That they bring those resources, that the Needham Housing Authority, by virtue of being a very small housing authority, doesn't have all those resources. So they need to bring those resources to them.
But the Cambridge Housing Authority is in an adverse position at this junction. So they are, they're negotiating terms. And so Cambridge Housing Authority is a sophisticated player, and they're now going to be the developer working on their developer terms that are going to be favorable to them. That's their role. That's ultimately what their role is. And yes, they're going to offer all sorts of resources, but they're going to do it according to the terms that they want, that are going to be as favorable as they possibly can to them. And the concern that we're kind of expressing is who's going to counterweight that on the Needham Housing Authority side. And the repercussions are the deal is done and it gets turned over to us, and they're looking for funding. And
We don't like the negotiation.
and we don't like the terms, or they're unfair. So it's just a concern, it's a concern that I have.
But we wouldn't be, but Peter, in that situation, we wouldn't be in any different position than any other investor, an equity investor or a bank that's loaning them money. they're looking at just to protect their own self-interest. And as we're dealing with the housing authority, we're looking to protect the town's self-interest. So, they've got to provide us with some comfort that they have their ducks in a row.
Right, okay,
Would be the way I'd look at it.
Okay. we,
And I don't know what that will take, but, clearly it requires some explanation, and I understand why Reg doesn't want to talk about it here. But that needs to be ferreted out at some point.
okay,
So in terms of next steps, we've talked about getting somebody in, whether it's the consultant for the CPC or somebody else to give us a primer. On which I feel like I need more than ever after that presentation to really understand the finances
Financing.
and how it works.
God bless you.
Yes, or at least just to understand, like that question that I asked, like, what is the thing that really has to happen? How does this all come together? So that's one thing that, if you guys still think it's a good idea
Oh,
that
yeah.
we could be doing. And then the other thing is to get together the documents that we have, look at them and start the oversight of, what we can of what is already going on.
Yeah, what's the date that they have to, just so you might know, what's the date that they have to respond to the CPC?
The initial due diligence questions, the responses are due January 1st.
Okay,
And kind of in practice, it's been if any questions come after the initial round, they have a little bit more time if they can't.
so at what point do we want to provide input to the CPC with our questions? I guess we
As soon as possible. They've already sent out the initial round. Presentations for applicants don't start until January 10th. That's the first day, and I anticipate this is probably, as long as the schedule works out, they'll probably be the first one. They're gonna be the most in-depth, and I anticipate there'll be follow-up questions as well, so we want to give them enough time to respond.
All right, so do we want a timetable or just?
we should do that.
When should
Yeah.
we get any questions to, Kate? On
Can we do it in a
CFO?
week? I mean, is that,
And I would say if it
Yeah.
helps, the next
Realistic?
CPC meeting is December 13th.
So the CPC questions available to us now, can we
Yeah.
see?
Yeah, they just sent them out. She
They
said,
just
they're
sent
in
them
our
out.
So it
email,
just
yeah,
came out this
it's
morning.
just late this
And-
afternoon,
okay.
yeah.
It's a little easier if you just the way we put this formula together, it's a little overwrought in the beginning, because
Yeah.
it's standard. Skip all the way to the bottom. And look at and these are the project particular questions.
Okay.
So they're probably like 12 of them there. And, if you'll see that much of what we've discussed tonight is they're feeling around and they kind of have it there.
Okay,
So I think that,
Peter and I, you talked earlier about some information that you had. I sent along last year's question and answers that we sent to the housing authority from the CPC, and I sent it along to Kate and Cecilia with all of their responses from last year. The questions are just about the same, that the CPC sent out. It's probably gonna be an update of what they sent out last year. So the question is, should we just wait and get their responses, or do you wanna see the previous year's information? How do you wanna handle that?
I can tell you what CPC is doing, if that helps. Most of the members had already seen last year's questions because they were already a part of CPC, but the new members have not looked at them. And we're trying to get the housing authority to tell us what's changed, and if they want to copy and paste their answers from last year, then that's fine, because then they're telling us what's changed instead of us assuming, oh yeah, this is what's changed, and providing something that may not be 100% accurate.
So when remember last year, the iterations,
Oh,
we
yeah.
couldn't figure out,
Yeah.
well, okay, can we get control over that?
Yes.
So, okay, so like red line versions or something, or just supplements only, but not,
I would like supplements only.
Yeah.
My sense, Rick, to answer your question about when we should ask our questions, just from speaking to Joe Barnes, my sense was it would be more helpful for us to get our questions to the extent to which they go beyond what's already been asked earlier.
Okay.
Rather than later, and then I think it may also be easier for the NHA rather than getting drips and drabs. Over time, I don't know what,
Folks can get questions to me is next week, the 6th. Is that enough time? Cause I can
Is there,
pretty quickly
is there a
compile it.
report coming from a financial analyst?
There is, and so as CPC gets everything, we will share it out with this group once it's gone to CPC, so we don't get ahead of them, so yes.
So I'm just wondering if that might answer some of our questions.
It might, and I think if we compile the questions by the sixth, if it ends up that it's answered, great. But I'd rather get them over to CPC so that they
Yeah,
can,
sooner rather than later.
So following up on Denise's point, when we submit the questions, we only submit them to Kate and to Cecilia.
yeah, and I can
Don't copy
circulate
anybody
the
else.
full
It will
list.
circulate, yeah, no, no, no.
Yeah.
That's a no-no.
And then can we get, like, so well, we've done that, like, you have control of the pen, like, if you can compile them, right? It's like, this is the same as this one. I just got
Yeah.
Katie's
She can consult.
way ahead.
I could do that.
All right.
Yeah, I've seen that work. I've seen that. I've seen that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's all.
This I can do.
Sorry.
So we might, since we're all here with our phones, think about a date for our next meeting in mid-January.
Ooh.
Perhaps.
So when do we think the CPC is going to bring NHA in?
January 10th, most
January
likely,
10th.
yeah.
So,
I'll have a firm date for you on after December 13th meeting, but that's the goal.
so I think since I'm the CPC representative, I kind of feel like I should be the liaison, like I should go to the meeting. So I'm gonna be the liaison. Right? And I got all their meetings lined in.
We just got the schedule too in the packet.
What date for the next meeting?
Mid-January? I mean, then we should have at least NHA's responses,
Yeah.
to those due diligence questions the first round, and we'll have some things to look at, or we will have the primer, right? We can sort of, one way or another, do something very useful in mid-January.
So the primer you want is to understand how affordable housing projects are financed. Is that what you want? Yeah, it's not easy.
I know, that's clear.
And do we have,
Even after a primer, you're gonna go.
and
like,
do we have someone who's gonna be able to do that?
So we started the conversation with Emily, who is the consultant for CPC. If for some reason that doesn't end up working out, we will find somebody else. But,
Okay. All right.
You know, I'll give you one piece of thing, is that, so. The thing that we're calling HLC and EO, HLC and DHCD. Once you get in line, once they say yes,
Mhm.
they make the rest of it happen. How's that for a summary,
That
right?
helps.
They, right?
Who's that?
It does, because
The
that's kind of like this.
HLC, we're gonna call it HLC, because we're all confused with it. But
HLC.
once
HLC.
they award, once they bless a project,
Mhm.
and they say, and they announce to the state, it's usually a state announcement that 12 or 15 projects have gotten tax credit allotments, they've gotten allocations from them. Once they allocate, they work with the team to get the rest of the project
Oh, okay.
financed. So that's the linchpin,
Yeah.
right? If that, I don't know if that helps. I mean,
No, it helps a
you're,
lot,
you know,
because, I
you're.
mean, I was looking all this, it's like, wow, like,
Which
you
comes
get
first,
this
the
one,
chicken or
but you
the
don't
egg,
get
right?
that one, and like, how
Yeah.
does this
Oh,
work?
yeah.
So that's
And-
what the critical information we got that was the easiest, I think, for us to understand, was from the lawyer, who said you need these three.
Yeah,
things
right,
in
right,
place.
right. I wrote them
You
down.
need capacity, you
Permitted.
need community.
You need permitting, you need the town to back you, and you usually need some, not necessarily how much they're asking for, but some money from the town. That looks, so you show your support, that it's there, that the state's not going in alone.
Yeah, we don't have a participant on this committee from the planning board, correct?
we don't.
Because that's a critical aspect of this. They're looking for zoning variance and they're looking to develop zoning changes. They're asking for a 4-story building in a much less restricted area. They're looking at less parking spaces than is required under our current bylaw. There's a number of changes that they're gonna be looking
I
at.
wonder if that is a short-term issue, like where this committee is gonna be. I mean,
Yeah, no, that's a short-term issue,
You
but
know.
it's,
We'll be continuing after that's all over, looking at the money, but I don't know, maybe.
yeah,
they-
it will be a short-term issue,
Mhm.
but if it doesn't get approved in the May town meeting, it's just
Oh, yeah,
postpone the
no,
whole
that's-
project.
Right, Right, that was
Oh, they're gonna have to go back to the
a
drawing.
critical step.
So can I just point out one thing, just to see, one thing we should at least nod to or make an effort on in terms of our questions is we want to be inquisitive about the 1.386. Because
Oh.
that's part of our oversight. So we want an accounting on that. We want questions around that. That's obviously in our lane. That's
Yeah, yeah.
post-grant. What is going on with the money? We should be drilling down on that and making sure that we have questions for that, because that's right in.
Well, that's, I've
That's
already asked this.
Beyond the budget they've trusted. You want details.
Oh, yeah.
So for
Yeah.
next steps, like Kathy had suggested, I think the housing primer presentation, but I think I guess let me suggest, would it be helpful, we bring all the materials from what's been funded from the town to NHA for the new chambers, and just this past Maytown meeting, there was money for seabeds. I think it was like $250,000.
Yeah,
So if we come with all of those documents and just have this committee digest them, understand what has already been funded before we bring the housing authority in, does that make sense for that next
Before the-
meeting?
before bringing the housing
Before
authority in.
bringing,
I don't understand what you meant by that.
Are we bringing the housing authority back?
Well, if you want oversight over that money, at some point, I imagine you'd want them back.
okay.
Oh, I
Oh,
see.
yeah,
But
right.
I just want to make sure that this committee all has the same foundational information, what money we've even given them.
Well, I think, I would say you would wanna ask, who are the, I mean, you know, the traffic study they have in for $18,000. It's a lot of money for a traffic study. You know, you probably wanna know who did the traffic study and the contract them out.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why I asked the question is to, are these budgets, are they actual? If they're actual, how much has been spent? If they're fully spent, who did you hire? All of that stuff. I mean, just, a traffic consultant, and at some point, we can decide whether we want to get into the details about, give me a cost report telling me, what percentage of the traffic study is done and have you been fully billed, and, what's the complication that Reg talked about with respect to the fact they hadn't billed the town yet? I don't understand that,
How are they paying, who's paying the bill?
well, who's monitoring? That's usually the project developer's role. So. I'm gonna come.
So, shall we pick a date?
Yeah.
Since we're all here.
Back to the date. Again with the date.
Focused on the task.
I got, yeah, I know, that's tough to do, Kathy. I'm in January.
Yeah, how about the 18th?
I cannot.
I can't do a Thursday.
Okay, no Thursdays. How about the 17th? That's a Wednesday.
17th to Wednesday.
I can't do it Wednesdays.
No Wednesdays.
Today.
Finance.
Committee.
Oh, okay. So no Wednesdays and no Thursdays.
Wednesday?
Finance committee begins its work in December.
And I
didn't
I
understand
can
that.
only do half the Tuesdays, right? So.
What about Mondays? Monday.
How about the 16th?
Monday's Martin
This is
Luther
in
King.
January, how about the 16th?
That
Was
might be
it-
We'll do the
it.
16th. We don't have select board on the 16th.
No, Dave?
No select board meeting that day.
I know, but
No,
how about
I'm-
you?
I'm-
Yeah, we-
I'm reaffirming.
Yeah, we could. The 16th works for me. It's
All
a
right.
Tuesday that I can do.
Tuesday's fine.
Does January 16th not work for anybody?
And I think based on our track record,
Yeah.
we probably ought to plan for 2 hours.
I like 6, to be honest. Unless everyone's starving.
Peter, is that all right?
Yeah.
great. With the hearth at 5.
It's great.
Okay, 6 p.m. on the 16th.
Maybe ask the people who aren't here too, if they.
Yes, I
can
will.
Do 6 out.
Yeah, Erwin
can do
is
6.
attending a
Yeah, I
course that
can't,
he's
but-
teaching, so.
You can't?
I can,
Yeah.
I can do 6.
Before we close out too, I am thinking about Ross, the gentleman who opened up public comment. To what extent does this group have control over the type of transparency that he's sort of looking for? Like, is that I want to help him, can we? Or is that, like, where should his concern be directed to be addressed, I guess is my question. I just want to make sure we close that thread as well.
Was he?
So this is one of our lane questions.
Right, exactly, exactly.
I have a feeling I'm gonna be the guardian of the lanes.
I usually am.
It
As
feels a
long as you
little
don't mind
outside.
going over the yellow line.
That's- yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're doing oversight of town expenditures of this particular project. I think he was talking about other documents and other,
He wanted
Just like the
access to
reports.
all of the NHA documents that they have. That they put together, they've submitted. At one point in time, there was a repository that they kept for all this information. Apparently he wanted access to that. I don't know, that's beyond, I would believe, our scope, but, you know, Reg was here to hear the request. They should be the ones to respond.
I think it really, the reason I asked the question was, I really think it's a housing authority. They have all of those documents. He's a resident of the housing authority. And he can make that request of them. I think that it's a request that's been made in the past, and there's been some effort to respond to that in a beneficial way for the community, you know, making documents readily available. So, I think that was the reason why I asked the question. Or asked whether or not I think that's the place for him to go.
It might be, something, if they don't have capacity at the housing authority, then they could put into the scope of work for the Cambridge Housing Authority to update and have a project website.
You know,
Oh,
when we
interesting.
did the
In the
build,
budget.
It's in the.
it's in the budget.
It's on the timeline at the end, so, yeah.
Because when we did this building, right, all of it, when we did use CPC funds to do this building, all that stuff is online.
We weren't sophisticated online at that time, but it was all available.
It was all there. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Now they can go online, but back then it was, they made
This
the
building
request, they
was-
received it within 48 hours.
This building was the largest CPA project in the Commonwealth at the
Yeah.
time. It was $19 million CPA.
Yeah, it was the first one that was debt financed through the CPA.
I think it still is.
I think it's still, it's
Or maybe it's the largest historic preservation project, but, yeah.
CPA.
Yeah.
CPA.
okay, well,
And I guess that's just one other thing that, just to clarify, we certainly are talking about the housing bucket of CPA money, but that's not the only CPA money that's available.
That's true.
Okay.
And there are competing interests. There's a request in through the CPA for the 2.8 for the new tennis courts at the high school,
So
2.6.
So, but Denise, one of the things that came up in our conversation with Joe Barnes as chair of CPC was to use, kind of follow the model. What Rick and I did when we were on CPC was we worked with the finance department and developed financial models and projections. And so that we developed a knowledge base and brought the committee along and had presentations to the committee about what choices were gonna have to be made if we made certain expenditures in certain amounts. So the example I always bring up is Emery Grove, because originally the request was I think almost twice that amount. And so we came up, we thought about it, we talked about it, and we asked we asked Dave to come up with financial models based on different appropriated amounts. And I think that the CPC should be doing the same thing on this round with this request.
This is only phase 1A and 1B. There's phase 2, there's the other High Rock Estates. I mean, you know, this is gonna go on for 20 years.
It's gonna go on for 20 years. I
So
think that's really
the-
important to acknowledge that.
It would probably be useful to, if the CPA.
Yep.
I'm so confused.
CPC manages the CPA.
If they get, if whatever that group gets this report, my guess is that she will opine on how much town money is rule of thumb typical for a project of a certain size to be made available in order to get the attention of HOC, whatever, I'm just HLC. It might also be something that it would be worthwhile if if everyone reviews the report, it might be worthwhile to provide that report to the Needham Housing Authority, because it will have information that will go into this negotiation that they're having?
I believe they'll get it because Reg is a member of the
Yeah.
CPC.
So it would be very useful to him and
Yeah.
to their lawyer to have this information so that they don't negotiate something that is completely contrary to what's being.
Does the timing of the report, does it come in a timely fashion to be influential on that negotiation?
So we think an initial report before by their next meeting or around their next meeting, which is
Yeah.
December 13th, and then a final report
so
in
soon.
February. So
I will say
Okay.
the initial report does not touch on a lot of the in detail questions that TBC is asking.
Mhm.
It's,
No, it's probably just financial.
Yeah.
It's not the questions that they're asking are mostly non-financial. And that's.
And they can certainly look at last year's report, which is online,
Mhm.
and look at that. Of course, things change, other projects submitted, but there's a basis to which last year they were making assumptions,
Mhm.
so they can
Oh,
rely upon.
I was thinking of the NHA and its negotiations with
Oh,
Cambridge.
that's what I'm referring to,
Housing.
in terms of we've had the housing authority in those financial reports for the last 7 years.
No, we're talking about their analysis of
The consultant.
Of the
Yeah.
consultant's analysis of
Consultant.
the proposal.
I know, you're talking about the financial model.
the financial consultant did not want to look at last year's application. She wanted to get a fresh with what they were presenting this year.
Yeah.
So they just submitted their initial application, so it's not, I don't think it's at all in depth.
No, it's changed.
So I guess I'm not understanding when they're gonna get these negotiations and get, a contract in place with the Cambridge Housing Authority, because I cannot envision the town supporting in town meeting voting to an appropriation if they have not even made an agreement with the Cambridge Housing Authority. So,
It sounded like the negotiations were going on.
Yeah,
right
they're
now.
going on now.
Right now.
Yeah, but there's a,
He said, no, well, and didn't he say January, February, assigned?
that's when they expected to have it done.
Said it's probably that, I actually took notes on it.
That's what I said. That's what in my notes is February.
I mean, tell me.
It's May.
Um,
Comes quicker than you think.
Every year.
but the articles are due the first Monday in February.
Oh, really?
Any more discussion?
And so I just want to give us a moment to reflect here, or two, on what our objective was for tonight. So we certainly wanted to see the Needham Housing Authority present. We needed to hear what the Cambridge Housing Authority was saying. We wanted to understand capacity, right? And we wanted clear benchmarks on when the deadlines were for things. So I think we accomplished that tonight. I think that was a good piece of work that's done for tonight. So now we're kind of put out our new queries that we want to get answered in the next step.
Yeah.
Because I think we're also building our own layer cake here as we're going on. So,
Call it something.
We've also learned, we've learned enough to know what questions to ask.
that's it.
That's,
That's exactly
for
right.
me, the best takeaway was I've learned enough to know what questions.
Well, I also think it's good that we have we all heard together, the same information, so various people coming with various levels of knowledge, that this is something we have as a common basis of understanding.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Kathy.
Yeah,
And I
that is
do,
good.
because there's different expertise around the table and some of us that are very new to this. Certainly Avery knows a whole lot from the Housing Authority, and Rhonda, we're hearing from you, and Peter and Rick, who have all of that. But to remind ourselves of the charge and the lane that we fulfill, because it's easy for us to drift off into a path that isn't helpful information or isn't beneficial to the process we're engaged in. So,
Yeah, mission creep.
yeah. Mission.
And it's an important, it's an important project and it's important to the town.
Incredibly.
And it's very, very important.
No, I think that the oversight is a way to help it to succeed. I think the oversight is critical to success.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. Everybody believes that this project needs to go forward.
Mhm.
It's just making sure that it's done so in the proper fashion with all of the safeguards in place. That's all.
And you know how deeply committed the town has been to this concept? Like, this isn't a new idea that's come on. In all the time that I've served in town government and state government, we have talked about the need to be able to work on the Needham Housing Authority. and put away money in that housing bucket with very clear conversations
Mhm.
that we are thinking about the Needham Housing Authority. So this isn't a brand new idea.
No,
This is
we've been
something
doing-
we're really trying
We've been
to.
extra funding that for the last 4 years, you know, in anticipation of these requests,
Right,
and we still don't have enough money.
yeah.
You know. Motion adjourned.
Good meeting.
Yeah,
All
great
in
meeting.
favor?
1 minute shy of 3 hours. But it's-
I'm saying we should plan for at least two.